These are symbiotic fungal networks. So what they do is they're exchanging carbon that they get from root systems for fungi, for phosphorus that the fungi are foraging for in the soil. The DNA that actually makes up our own DNA, human DNA, is mostly made out of phosphorus that first passed through a fungal network. Our lab is interested in trying to track resource exchange between plants and fungi, trying to quantify how much of that resources are exchanged, and then predict, right? Predict how these underground flows are going to respond to climate change.
We have to look at slime molds and the Tokyo subway network. Seriously. The slime mold grew to connect all the nodes/stops in a more efficient design than the centrally planned committee of engineers hired by the Japanese government. It's quite sobering to realize a slime mold can design a better network in a single day. Satoshi Nakamoto understood the power of the slime mold. Bitcoin is a living system, constantly changing based on environmental stimuli. Some of Bitcoin's best characteristics are simply reflections of successful evolutionary strategies found in nature, specifically in the fungi kingdom. Fungi are predominantly made up of mycelium, an underground decentralized intelligence network described by Paul Stamets as Earth's natural internet. Fungi are decentralized intelligence networks. Fungal networks don't have a centralized brain. Instead, they are a one-cell walled root system called mycelium. This underground stomach and distributed intelligence network is capable of sending information bidirectionally over long distances and even across species lines.
All of these sorts of problem-solving activities require having some, not only textbook knowledge of the world, but real-time knowledge of the world. You know, if we have an idea, if the world itself is a moving target. So if we have an idea, what is the state of the world? And if we do perturbations in the world, or if we're observing perturbations in the world, like climate change, how do we characterize those?
These fungal networks constantly evolve based on feedback from their environments.
Nobody is a single organism. We are all a mixture of symbionts, maybe one big one and many small ones, or many small ones together, but that's the essence of the importance of the whole thing. We are never alone, never alone. We have been evolved from combinations of microorganisms, and we remain so, bigger and smaller together.
It came about something that we liked very much and turns out to be very useful, is viewing these fast parallel algorithms in a different way as communication protocols. And the problem of graph connectivity became a very different problem. It became a very different looking problem. It became a problem about how do two people figure out, each of them has a separate piece of data, figure out the property of this union of the two pieces of data. And what we discovered is that the number of bits these two players exchange in order to solve that particular problem is exactly the same as the depth of a monotone circuit solving graph connectivity. Or actually, any computational problem can be translated to this framework. And once we started thinking about the problem in these terms, the translation, by the way, between the two types of models, even though they look very different, one is computational, one is information theoretic, the translation between the two languages is very simple. You can teach it to undergrads in half an hour. This was this translation to the communication model. But that it will become valuable in many other ways is something I couldn't see at the time.
First of all, we are always a mixture of organisms together. Secondly, this mixture is transmitted from one generation to the next, which makes it genetically stable, more or less. Thirdly, that the ability to variate genetically, we have much more possibilities of genetic variation within the holobiont and hologenome. And finally, this gives us many more opportunities to evolve better situation, greater fitness. That's, I think, the main points.
Interspecies games that fuse between Curve Labs and Weave teams. At interspecies games, we think financializing or tokenizing nature is not sufficient enabler for sovereignty. On the contrary, this approach risks the new creation of algorithms of extraction Thus, we think agency must be embedded in internet relationality of species and their environment. We propose playing into existence a new paradigm of a networked agency of interspecies context. Nature doesn't need our charity. We need more robust and convivial forms of engagement to create new relations of solidarity between humans and nature that would foster interspecies engagement and coordination towards the realization of a not only human regenerative economy. How to activate a new we, a new collective consciousness that allows us to summon and perpetuate an interspecies agency.
So speak a little bit about your stance towards technology in the formation of MetaMan or the noosphere or basically a global superorganism.
Well, so the formation of a superorganism has very little, doesn't speak very loudly about what the impact on our lives and our experience of life is going to be. It is really, it's like, if you look at the human body and you can say, you look at a red blood cell or, some other cellular construct, and is it happy? Is it pleased with what it's doing in the body? Does it even have a sense of its larger role within the superorganism? It's certainly protected in a way in that it's their homeostatic sort of guardrails are established so that by and large, a red blood cell is kind of doing what it should be doing in terms of the larger functioning. But I think we're kind of the same way in that there are aspects of technology that don't really contribute to our sense of well-being, other ones that really do. But certainly technology is absolutely central to the formation of this global superorganism. Couldn't exist without it.
The emergent properties of the ecosystem become the variables that matter. For example, in the case of the human organism, the organism will process a lot of these internal and external signals with a view towards, does this warrant inflammation or not? Does this contribute to metastability, or is it a destabilizing signal?
Absolutely, 100% true. I don't think anyone can disagree with that. I mean, it cannot happen without technology. And of course, it needs just the right kind of technology.
It seems like things such as the blockchain, for example, are emerging in a way that they create enabling constraints for more collaboration. So, for example, this idea of protocols that are emerging, right? These kind of layers that you can use to historicize the information and the transactions so that you can agree on a language, let's say, seems to be an enabling constraint that is emerging from society to increase the level of collaboration between organizations and so on. So what do you think about that?
I like that a lot. Though that to me is sort of saying, all right, here's a new code that will enable the interface between two systems that previously were competitive to translate the requirements, the specifications, or whatever from one to the other. And I think nature does that all the time. The genetic code is a translation mechanism between structure and function. And a protocol does that. A new code does that. I think symbolic language does that.
As with all adaptations, there's a few things that work and millions of things that don't work. And so we need the right kind of technology.
So this might be a tough question to answer, but are there any technologies that are going to have a big impact 50 years from now? Things that are really going to change our way of life?
Yeah, well, of course, I will not. The really good ones are the ones that come by surprise. So they're obviously the ones I won't mention.
But it does require technology. Teilhard appreciated that, and I don't see how anyone could argue against it. So there's something we could all agree upon.
A third kind of engagement modality is this idea of a problem-solving ecosystem. So in this case, we could imagine that there are lots of feedback loops, that we have multiple contributors, human-based and machine-based contributors, and people are contributing ideas, they're providing feedback, that it enables a kind of real-time collaborative modeling, and you could have real-time inputs from humans and machines in the world that are concomitant with the evolution of the models.
In the paper of Goldwasser, Mihaly, and Rakov, when they suggested the concept of zero-knowledge proofs, they had a notion that it will be extremely valuable because the place they were coming from is these situations, these adversarial situations, cryptographic situations. I want to keep my factors private because all my private information depends on the fact that it's private. They understood that having a zero-knowledge proof of such a fact is extremely valuable for cryptographic protocols, and by the time there were already various cryptographic protocols for other facts, for other applications like signing contracts and jointly making randomized decisions, and at the time playing poker over the internet. I think there were various sort of seemingly impossible things that were possible with cryptographic assumptions. We didn't understand their value at the time, but it was clear that having zero-knowledge proof is useful. This ability allows for a complete automation of taking any protocol in which security is breached all over the place. The YAO proved a result like that for two-party interactions. So it proved that anything that two players can achieve without privacy, without regards to privacy, can be converted using cryptography to an interaction which protects them. So maybe contract side, well, it was more about computing functions. And then, what we wanted to do and could do with the device of zero knowledge was extend this to interaction of any number of players.
We want to move from an atomized understanding of charity as the modus operandi for impact towards a relational one where transformation happens at the edges, unleashing viral dynamics. Our approach draws on the theory of social choice as opposed to classical game theory, from node-oriented systems to edge-oriented systems, as we try to articulate peer influence as a multi-species paradigm.
And you already feel that it's not about ecologists having fun in the field, it's really about data and working together and making sense of data. And that's why University of Twente is on board.
Yeah, thank you, Koos. Now, first of all, I think it's a kind of personal motivation. Biodiversity is important, so maybe put that first. Second is, as a University of Technology, Twente is a University of Technology, we want to make impact. And if you want to make impact, you somehow have to connect the technology you're developing with a certain domain. That's important because you think, yeah, we're good in building digital infrastructure, we're good in AI, we're good in monitoring, but only if you have the real impact if you connect it to a domain. On the other hand, also by connecting it to domain, you also get inspiration for your own research. You have to improve your system, you have to change it. So it's a kind of two-way process. And in this way, we think we really can contribute with our technology to biodiversity.
So one idea we have for this, we call it the Open Body Initiative, that we're putting together a team and we're trying to get support for this idea right now. But the idea is that it's about collaboratively modeling virtual human. And so at all levels of the system, so biological system level, like skeletal, neurological, vascular, and so on, at the organ level, the heart, the kidneys, and at the cellular level, at the molecular level. Models like these exist in the world today, but they exist in a vacuum. And so in order to model, for example, a kidney in a vacuum, you have to make lots of assumptions about the context and build that into the model.
NTT Data is envisioning the cyber-first future. Cyber-first is the world where we can see an outcome before acting by conducting data-based simulations. We call it digital twin fusion, as two digital twins are combined. Digital twin computing technology enables more advanced simulations by fusing multiple digital twins. Let's predict the future and create more efficient society and new services together with NTT Data.
This is part of the descent map. Again, that's focusing on this idea of digital democracy rebooted on the blockchain so that we can become part of the Athenian superorganism.
We seek to reformulate human nature false dichotomy through platforms leveraging automated logic and game mechanics facilitating engagement around resource accumulation and collective allocation.
And I have this, beautiful Venn diagram with everything on it, which the point really here is that we need to be not just interdisciplinary, but sort of polyepistemological, meaning that literally one way of thinking about what we know is insufficient to totally understand these new things. But we can't necessarily separate the evolution in the technologies from the evolution in the social systems that are sort of, their nervous system becomes these technologies. As I sort of bounced between research on aerospace materials into complex social systems, into robotics, and then sort of back into more OR and large-scale operational automation stuff. And then found myself in crypto being like, oh, wow, cool, I get to do all the things. And so in this particular talk, I'm going to hone in on this sort of triangle here, where we look at economics, complex systems, and systems engineering as sort of the points that I use to triangulate crypto-economic systems.
Talk about anything too technical because I knew you'd figure out different mistakes that I made. So I thought something that would allow us to just kind of be visionaries together. So when we're talking about the opportunities that exist today, we have these new ingredients. We have AI, which suddenly can do things it couldn't do before. It's really good at synthesizing text and creating images like this one. We have augmented reality, which is still trying to get traction with the Apple Vision Pro. I think it's going to be completely transformative. It's going to change everything again. And we have hybrid intelligence systems, these concepts about these tried and applied concepts, combining humans and machines in new ways to solve problems that can't be solved in any other way. But when we start to think about how we can combine them, and what we can do if we combine them. And I hope you'll help me think about this over the next few days. It seems almost unfathomable to try to figure out what the future looks like.
And you'll notice I've placed some edges on here because it turns out the fields I've actually worked in are closer to the edges. Computational social science, operations research, and much of my PhD work was in what we would consider cyber-physical systems, which is a bit like applied cybernetics. So it's like a hybrid where we're automating or roboticizing systems that are larger scale in nature.
Involved this sort of collaborative problem-solving idea, where a solution is defined as a pathway between an initial state and a goal state. And the idea is you can engage large populations of people in identifying all these intermediate states, spawning new nodes.
Does anybody see this word? That is Kubernetes, from which we get cybernetics. And it is the Greek word for a steersman. Now, this is a bit more sophisticated than beating people over the head. If any of you have ever read Homer, they were full of long ships. And you imagine the guy at the back of a long ship with a tiller, and he's trying to get over there, and there's a light burning, a lighthouse, the head goes. So he's got to get there, and he's got the wind and the sea and the rain and everything bashing him. He hasn't got a computer. So how is he going to get through this mass of variables, we would call them, that we can't measure and can't compute because we don't know the equations? What he does is he fixes his eye on the light and juggles, and he gets there without knowing why, you see, but he's steered there.
Evaluating ideas that other people have contributed and then having multiple pathways between an initial state and a goal state. One of the questions that arises now as we consider emerging capabilities is how could we employ AI, for example, to contribute to the same problem-solving network?
I talked a lot about Jim Rutt, who came out of MIT. He was a trustee at Santa Fe Institute, and he helped develop BigChain DB database that then became Ocean Protocol. So that he overlaps with Trent McConaughey in the other map, and this plans for the Filecoin and Protocol Lab systems, that these things are all interrelated. And again, what Jim Rutt is talking about in a complex system is that there's game mechanics. It is game B. So they're talking about a transition away from game A, which you might call late stage capitalism, into game B, which is collectivism, mutualism, but not framed as socialism or communism, but rather as youth social insects and doing things for the common good, and to create a liquid democracy. And you think of liquid as being part of this phase shift and fluid dynamics that's being modeled on social physics.
To introduce our game a little bit, the main game mechanic rests around the idea of the tree of life, an embodiment of the spirit of the park. And in this context, the Volkspark Friedrichshain, which coordinates the narratives and user flows around the park.
Proposed in this talk is called evolutionary development, or EvoDevo. It is a model that a few thousand biologists and other scientists find more useful than simple evolution or Darwinism to describe both biological and non-biological change. Evolutionary processes look like growing trees with more branching on the tree over time, and each branch is unpredictable in its direction of growth. Think of Darwin's tree of life. Developmental processes, by contrast, look like funnels, the opposite of a tree. They take the chaos and diversity out of a system, and they guide it to a highly probable and predictable future.
So these are just images from a Dutch sculpture studio where they were building a double of the tree of Tenere that was used and displayed at Burning Man. It's an interactive LED light tree sculpture that looks very much like the funnel structure that the gentleman was just referring to. It's made out of metal and rubber and plastic lights for the leaves, and this second version of the Tree of Tenere is scheduled to be installed in Dallas in a community called Deep Ellum. It's incredibly artificial and mechanical and connected to these LED interactive light displays.
The tree has two main objectives: to become self-aware through oracular inputs and to enrich its relations with its community. The Tree of Life represents the tokenomic agency with an associated Ethereum address owned by a Gnosis safe. The safe is the owner of a spectralized, fractionalized NFT, thus is the beneficiary for the majority of the staked tokens. These tokens enable both access for governance, for the resources, and also provide incentives for incentivizing behavior of its community, both in terms of facilitating learning and also the betterment of the public space.
They're very special, it's not only about the technology that is behind them and how they exist, but I believe that every work of art obviously is a creation, so it comes from something that wasn't existing before and that it's injected into the world, obviously by artists. So of course, it's always something living and alive, and pieces of life. But the plantoids are very special because they are life forms for real, and only they live on the blockchain. Life always finds its way, and it's very crazy and fantastic to understand that it also found its way in the blockchain. I will leave the word to Primavera, who now will talk to you about the plantoids, and then we can also show you how the plantoid works.
So plantoids are synthetic life forms which live on the blockchain and feed off cryptocurrencies. The plantoids, they cannot fully reproduce themselves on their own, but they know that humans can help them reproduce. And of course, they need to pay the humans in order to help them in the reproduction process. I'm going to skip those things because we don't have enough time. But let's talk about plantoids. So a plantoid is made of two important components. One is the body, which is an actual mechanical metallic sculpture, and then the spirit or the soul of the plantoid, which lives on a smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. And those two components actually interact with one another in order to enable the plantoid to actually reproduce themselves. Plantoids are little mechanic plants, and then they also can generate seeds that will help them reproduce. And so they try to attract humans, and they invite them to provide some crypto to them, and in exchange of this, the humans will be able to collect a particular NFTs that will be generated by the plantoid. And so essentially how it works is that you can feed the plantoids. When it gets fed, it's activating itself, and then you can interact with the plantoid, whether you can like speak to it, or you can touch it, or you can activate it through sensors. And these feed into either a generative art algorithm or into generative AI. And so you are co-creating along with the plantoid an art piece, and then this art piece will be then minted as an NFT.
The original EEG Tree of Tenere at Burning Man with EEG headbands.
And then given back to you as a seed, the digital seed of the plantoid that you have collected. And then you can sell it on the secondary market, and every time it is sold on a platform, the royalties go back to feed into the plantoid. So it creates a symbiotic relationship in which humans are incentivized to feed the plantoid in order to collect the seed and then speculate on the seed. But the more you speculate on the seed, the more you're actually giving the royalties to the plantoid, and so the more you continue to help it in the reproduction process.
And now we're back to the Deep Ellum, Dallas, Texas copycat of the Burning Man Tree of Tenere. It's being installed. There are images of murals with sort of esoteric imagery of Babylon. And this image shows the secondary tree being installed on the sidewalk. I think this is in the large arts district. And there's all sorts of wires and cables being hauled through. And it's incredibly unnatural. Lots of plugs for all these power systems, which it's crazy to imagine somehow this is going to be sold as sustainability. But really is signal communication in Dallas, which is a center of that with the AT&T Smart Cities and Texas Instruments, of course. And here it is installed at night, which is very unnatural to have a tree lit up at night in the Arts District.
And then the second phase is once the plantoid has accumulated enough funds in order to ensure its reproduction, it will start looking for a mate in order to reproduce itself. And so the mating process happens so when the threshold is reached, the smart contract activates a call for proposal, and any artist or designers can then submit propositions about how they envision to create the next plantoid. And then all the people that have acquired the NFT can then vote on the proposition that they like the most, and the winning proposition will be selected in order to then become the next person that will be entitled to create a new plantoid, which leads to the third phase of reproduction, which is hiring. And this is when the smart contract will then automatically transfer the funds to the selected winner, who will then be hired or commissioned by the plantoid in order to create a new replica of itself. And so here you can see the genealogical tree of the plantoid. So plantoid 1 was created in 2014, and it was a very basic Bitcoin plant. But then it has evolved, and then it moved into Ethereum, and then it started making NFTs. So here you can see this one is plantoid 14. And so basically they keep reproducing themselves, and they try to identify what is the next evolutionary trait that will make them more fit for the environment. So the idea is really that as an artist, I don't know what is the best design for a plantoid, but the environment will tell. And so over the years, then, like when NFT became very popular, then the plantoids realized, well, actually, if I start making NFT, I might get even more money, and I will be able to reproduce myself more. And so eventually there is this evolutionary digital Darwinism that emerged, and then the plantoid species is evolving based on what the market environment looks like. Whenever the plantoid is accumulating enough money to reproduce itself, it's gonna send a percentage of those funds back to its parent, so to the plantoid that actually generated it, as well as 10% to the artist that created it. And the reason that this is a positive pyramid scheme is because this actually creates an incentive for the artist to try and create the most beautiful plantoid, and to also incentivize the making of derivative, because the more the plantoid will reproduce, then the more royalties will come back to the original artist. Most importantly, perhaps, this actually flips completely copyright on its head, not only because instead of trying to maximize exclusivity and prevent anyone from looking at the work except if they pay, in the case of plantoid, you want to maximize the visibility of the work in order to help it collect more funds. You also want to maximize the reproduction and the creation of derivative works, because that will give royalties. But perhaps most importantly, it's changed the model in which, instead of giving money to an artist and hoping that the artist will somehow continue to make works that we enjoy, we now can feed the artwork itself. The funds goes to the artwork, and then it is the artwork, through its own governance structure, that will elect who is the artist, who's the next artist that is invited to actually create a new copy of the work.
I will tell you about the heart of our tree. So basically how it works. We have ERC20 and ERC721 tokens on the network, and based on the result of the games, based on the result of some actions that you've done in the park, you've cleaned the park a bit, for example, you've played a game and you won. You get ERC20 tokens, and you can use them to manage your park.
We actually implemented one example of one of these interspecies games. This is called a game of oracles, and it's a specific instantiation called King of Bugs. So a bit of context. We were describing some type of autonomous system called the Tree of Life. The current best paradigm for instantiating a system that has, we would call it wisdom, self-consciousness, agency. The current best paradigm is called machine learning. Machine learning requires an amazing amount of high-quality data. So wouldn't it be cool if there was a way to get data into the system without making people work for it? Data that is really, really difficult to get. This is sort of the tricky thinking of the Tree of Life. It's a super clever system. So the Tree of Life is going to invite you to play a virally dynamic game. This is called the Game of Oracles, and this is a landing page for many different types of games. Again, one instantiation we have made is called King of Bugs. How do you play King of Bugs? So you're in the park, you've got your phone, you're running around, you're looking for cool insects.
Our responsibility as adults, if we could do anything for a kid who's 1 to 5 years old, what you can do is teach them how to learn. When Megan and I started thinking about what is Tinkergarten, so we're a family, we're going to spend time outside together, and just like every other parent, we would wake up on a Saturday morning and we'd be totally stressed out. We're sitting here eating our breakfast and we have no idea what we should do with this kid.
So we started researching what we knew were the best early childhood practices. And in parallel, we were thinking about our own most important memories from childhood, and a lot of them happened outside.
So when I got to talking to Jose about the notion of Newton and what he was thinking, it really resonated with me.
So the human race is about to enter a totally data-mined existence. And it's going to be really fun to watch. It's going to be one of those things where our grandkids are going to tell our kids, I can't believe you grew up in a world like that. The world in 30 years is going to be unrecognizably data mined. So what does that mean for education? Well, education happens to be, today, the world's most data mineable industry by far, and it's not even close. Right? So maybe one day healthcare will be up there when they have little nanobots that are in your bloodstream that are doing real-time analysis. But until then, it's not close. Education beats everything else hands down.
A lot of the products right now that we're able to create can actually leverage this massive amount of information. So, education produces more data really than any other industry in the world. And every day, all the time, all that information just goes into the ether and it disappears and we never are able to capture it. So what we're up to is really just trying to capture all of that information and connect it. So that's not just what a student is answering right or wrong on a multiple choice question, which yes is an important input, but not the only input. It's the activity that happens on the system. It's understanding the content at a really, really granular level. We call it an atomic concept level. But maniacally focused on tagging that content in a really, really granular way. These are all the mechanisms that we use to then kind of combine data science and psychometrics, which is kind of statistics around education.
Huge efforts have been made in sequencing the human genome. Today, after many years of research and billions of data points, that sequence is known. By adopting a similar perspective with user data, we may begin to better understand its role. Just as the examination of protein structures paved the way to genetic sequencing, the mass, multi-generational examination of actions and results could introduce a model of behavioral sequencing. As gene sequencing yields a comprehensive map of human biology, researchers are increasingly able to target parts of the sequence and modify them in order to achieve a desired result. As patterns begin to emerge in the behavioral sequences, they too may be targeted. The ledger could be given a focus, shifting it from a system which not only tracks our behavior, but offers direction towards a desired result.
I think we'll turn outer space into inner space.
I sold my business a few years ago and then had nothing better to do than go be a cosmonaut in training in Russia. And I had a wonderful time. I had no real day job. And one thing I did was to sign up to be a judge for the Healthcare X Prize, which, however, never happened. But it did get me thinking more and more about health. But health is really like just a repair job, and that's extremely expensive. This is a chart from my new CEO explaining how we spend our health dollars and how little they actually produce.
Our ability to interpret user data, combined with the exponential growth in sensor-enabled objects, will result in an increasingly detailed account of who we are as people. As these streams of information are brought together, the effect is multiplied. New patterns become apparent and new predictions become possible.
On the other hand, quantified self, that's prevention for rich people. And then I did a bunch of brainstorming sessions to figure out what, in fact, was I going to do to make the production of health a business model. And decided to do essentially a demonstration project, which my new CEO, God bless him, changed our name from HICCUP for Health Initiative Coordinating Council to The Way to Wellville, which is a little more understandable. And these are beautiful Wellville communities, including Clatsop County up in Oregon and Lake County, just an hour north of here when the traffic is good. They are wonderful places, and our core constituents, even when the adults have lost hope, even when they're the people who have no time, the caregivers who are too busy, they all want a better life for their children. We're also helping these communities understand trade-offs and return on investment. If you invest so much in asthma prevention, can you then take that saved money and use it for something else? We're also working on business models that are very complicated, with the people who put the money in not necessarily being the people who benefit. But there's got to be a way to get some of those cost savings back to investors so that we can build not just new age insurance companies, but also social impact investing. We want to turn social impact bonds into a standardized set of financial instruments so that all those rich people who actually do want to invest in health will have a way to do it. And we want to evaluate like crazy. Thank you very much.
But when you're taking 2 and 3 courses, we're starting to build, kind of a really interesting idea about what works for you and what doesn't, and in really different contexts.
And we started to think about how can we create those, how can we reverse engineer those kinds of experiences for our daughter. We started to form this curriculum of activities, and that's where Tinkergarten was born.
Tinkergarten provides kids the best early childhood learning in the healthiest classroom of all,
which is the outdoors.
It's a chance for kids to build the kind of skills like creativity, problem solving, persistence and grit, and curiosity. These capacities are going to help them become better learners and are going to help them solve the problems they're going to need to solve.
So just to look at some different ways that we've engaged in distributed sensing, just to kind of inspire us. We are sensors, we have 5 senses. Some would argue more. And we go out in the world and we observe things, and then we interpret those observations and we can share those.
And Dallas' work is to become in contact with your sensation. The idea being that sensation, all the different sensations we have and all the different ways in which we get input into our system are part of this conscious force. By bringing our attention to our bodies, we can begin to increase the conscious force within our bodies. You can take the exercise of being aware of your hands. They are your hands. How often do you feel that? How often do you really know that? No, they're just external sort of things. They're sort of like robotic. Right? We have to stop being robots ourselves. We have to start being human, which means we have to become aware. So you can be aware of your hands as the beginning.
There's a highly mobile tissue encompassing everything else and penetrating what is known as the undermined plane. Curious movements occur due to the bursting of vacuoles at atmospheric pressure, demonstrating the existence of hydraulic systems under different levels of pressure. Pseudogeometrically shaped fibrillar structures encompassing the muscles, skin, and fat. And you notice the same fractal arrangement everywhere. Large fibrils endlessly punctuated by other smaller ones. The basic composition of a polyhedric fibrillar network filled with jelly remains the same. A world of fibrillar chaos. The permanent lubrication by glycoaminoglycans through these diaphanous fields, where the drops are reminiscent of morning dew, is omnipresent, as is the migration of liquid within the fibers, suggesting that hydraulic mechanisms must play a decisive role here.
Or where are the tensions in your face, which can also be very useful because it shows you something of the mask you're wearing. If we want to see reality, we have to drop these masks. We can't go on looking out or looking in from the point of view of these masks, these ego projections. So it takes some certain courage to drop them, to let them go. So if you want to relax your face, that's a good starting point.
It would seem that the fibers intrinsically possess the ability to distend or retract thanks to their arrangement. Closer scrutiny reveals that ringed superpositions between the fibers become distended just before the overall movement ensues. Collagen 4 and 6 seem to be able to shear off and reform as if nothing had happened. They also seem to be able to dissociate into several parts, just like the hydra-headed monster of mythology, meeting any and every request to morph mechanically in space. This ability of matter to organize itself spatially offers an infinite potential for movement.
As far as the relation to the Avatar project, I think it's a question. I think it's a real big question as to the relation to real human evolution, which to me, I've spoken about, is to be incorporating this conscious force more and more in myself and to raise my level of consciousness.
This work was in collaboration with Cassandra Shar and Professor Patty Mize from MIT Media Lab.
Several psychological interventions have shown to improve the academic performance of young children and students. And a lot of these interventions intend to educate them about growth mindset, which is the idea that intellectual ability can be developed over time.
All these 3 components were extensively studied in different interventions when being applied in academic achievement. We have an artifact. In our case, it's a sorting hat from Harry Potter. We have an EEG headset, or electroencephalography headset, that can pick up the brain activity. We obviously have a computer that connects everything and keeps all the algorithms running smoothly and connects to the EEG headset via Bluetooth. We have a little Sphera robot which we use as a tangible output of the system, and we are also added a speaker inside of the head, so the head can actually talk to a child, but only the child, only the wearer will be able to hear what is being told.
This is a short video where you can see what the system looked like while the participant was using it. They would wear it, and control the Sphero robot with their brain signals.
We're able to do a sequel study, Thinking Cap 2.0, where we have explored multiple universes, multiple sci-fi universes. And if you have any questions regarding the first or the second study, please drop us a line.
I'm not talking about social consciousness. I'm talking about psychological consciousness, of actually going up the scale of consciousness, being more awake, not just aware of my body, my presence, but the people around me, nature, being connected with nature, all these kinds of things, greater and greater to the point of what was called cosmic consciousness.
And so, there's a project called eBird, if any of you are into birding, which is one of the most famous citizen science projects and one of the oldest ones, where people sort of collectively go out and monitor bird diversity and report their findings. And this has enabled studying migratory patterns of different birds and even, I think, identifying new species or variations that were unknown previously. Imagine that instead of binoculars, these people have augmented reality goggles on. And so now not only is what they're looking at enhanced in some way, colors could be intensified, temperatures could be visualized. Also, they could be directed by augmented reality to look more in certain places than other places if we're more interested in actually getting greater detailed data in a particular place. And on top of that, the AR is itself a sensor, and it's recording information. And it may observe things on its own that the humans haven't observed.
As far as the technology of the Avatar project, some of these things are going to happen whether we like it or not.
So let me define what is a cybernetic avatar means. The cybernetic avatar is a concept that includes not only remote avatars using the robot, the 3D image as a proxies, but also the augmentation of physical cognitive abilities of humans using the ICT and robotics. We aim to make the cybernetic avatar active in the cyber-physical world of Society 5.0. Go anywhere with the cybernetic avatar. Recently, our project just started the in-body cybernetic avatar like that with the 3D video avatars in the cyber-physical space. Well, what is Moonshot Goal 1? A bold new program for creating the disruptive innovation. Decided by the CST, the MEXT, and supported by the Japan Science and Technology Agency, JST. We will tackle the challenges of facing the future society through ambitious goal-oriented research projects, leaping beyond the limit of the conventional technology without fear of failure. Goal 1 is related to the realization of the society in which human beings can be free from the limitations of the body, the brain, space, and time by 2050.
The objective process of speeding up of the technical progress with this fourth way inside you.
It's a very, very good question. Gurdjieff was very interested in technology. He even thought of becoming some kind of technologist. He worked with transformers, which were being developed by Nikola Tesla, of course, at the time. And so technology was something that he wanted to include within the process. But how to include it if you don't have a really good idea of why you're here? How can you speak about where technology should go if you don't know where you're going, why you're here, what your purpose on Earth is, what human purpose is on Earth? If we begin to see why we're here, we can guide technology. But until we see that, how can we guide it?
The cyber technology that expands the functionality of our bodies and brains and will allow everyone to play active roles in their work and hobby. Today, just introduce the research activity in our goal, Moonshot Goal 1, on the cybernetic avatars. I will introduce the three kinds of the project managers. The first one is Hiroshi Ishiguro from the Osaka University. His major interest is or the focus on the hospitality-rich and moral dialogue cybernetic avatar to overcome the limitation of space, time. The second, the Professor Kota Minamizawa from the Keio University served as the project managers to overcome the limitation of the body. He just developing the new kind of the cybernetic avatar, sharing, experience sharing and skill sharing the cybernetic avatar.
It's just a fact. Some of these things are going to occur, as the Archbishop said, if we survive. And I think we need to be in contact with that so that there can be some kind of guidance, some kind of wisdom guidance to these technical processes. Otherwise, it's just going to create monsters as far as I can see. So who, as was asked, who is going to guide this process? Where are the wise people in the world? I think we have to find them, and they perhaps can help guide the technology.
And that kind of leads me to participatory sensing. So this is the idea that the human is the vehicle. We're not doing the sensing, but we're constantly carrying sensors around, our phones and so on. So there's this project, I think it was called, I don't know what it was called. It was about identifying potholes. So you had your phone with you, which has an accelerometer, and you're driving around, and as long as you load this app and you turn it on in your phone, then every time you go over a bump in the road, it records a pothole.
The Kite STEM Challenge takes place April 23rd through May 13th. Google is giving away $40,000 in cash to Lake Washington schools. Students download the Kite STEM app and answer STEM-related questions.
The value of STEM education is that it actually affects everything else that you can do. And learning about it early means that you can incorporate it the way that you need to.
The Lake Washington School District is involved with the Kite STEM Challenge because we really value community partnership, and we know that our community is made even stronger the more people and the more businesses that get involved.
Vision as a district is every student future ready, and there's clearly the learning that happens within the school day that contributes to that vision. And then there's the learning that happens in addition to what happens inside the school day. So I see this Kite STEM Challenge as one of those enrichment opportunities that complements what's happening in our schools, and it's all working together toward that vision of every student future ready.
So the Kite STEM Challenge is going to be an app that you can download to your mobile device, and students who don't happen to have a mobile device can ask their parent to download the app or someone else for them and still participate.
And ideally, it's a lot of fun along the way. It's something that you're doing not just to answer questions, but to have a good time surrounded by a park, surrounded by your peers, doing something that you enjoy.
Participating schools can be entered in drawings to win Pacific Science Center memberships, Google Swag, and other prizes. Download the app and get more information at kitestem.org.
So then the final component here to our prediction and modeling of the world and our ability to anticipate the impacts of our solutions is about coordinated action. So does anyone know how or why geese fly in the V formation?
There's something about the airstream that makes it easier for the other geese to fly.
That's exactly right. Think about how do we utilize local behavior to create kind of emergent impacts that are broadly beneficial. So we had this idea when the pandemic started. We realized that it's just simple napkin math. If you get a bunch of people in a room and you look at how many pairwise relationships there are among the people, those are the potential transmission opportunities for the virus. If you take those same number of people, so if you have 9 people all in the same room, there are 72 transmission opportunities. But if you take those same 9 people and you split them up into smaller groups of 3, then you only have, that's funny, I only count 9 up there, but I wrote 18. Anyway, you have many fewer opportunities for infection to spread if you spread them out. So, people needed to go to stores and get groceries and so on. So we thought, what if we could somehow, if instead of everybody going to the same grocery store at the same time, if we could distribute people more evenly across the grocery stores when they're shopping, if we could reduce infection opportunities and pandemic impacts. So we built an app called CrowdMeter, which is, you can see it on the left, it's an iPhone app. We're still piloting it in Ithaca, the town where we're from. But then this raises the same question of, what if you take the data that's in the app, where we tell you how crowded each store is, and then we make that part of your immersive experience? Are you going to be more inclined to actually act on that information in that situation? And if we give you a way to interact with the data and say, hey, you told me this store was empty, but it actually looks full, and I have a way to actually provide that feedback. We have an opportunity to behave more effectively, to behave more systemically, and to actually transform the world, to co-evolve with the world and to influence the evolution of the world around us.
There are so many different personality traits. I mean, we have hundreds of these different traits, not just your activity, but your perceptions of the world, your experiences, et cetera. These are all being filtered into kind of, what we call kind of a learning profile, which helps to understand an individual student at any time. And so, Newton kind of works out of the box. It can start to adapt to you within a few minutes.
What our technology platform does is it enables anyone to raise their hand in their local community and say, I'm interested in becoming a leader.
Wildflower Montessori supports entrepreneurial Montessori-trained teachers who want to open their own affiliated microschools. The nonprofit Wildflower Foundation offers grants and low-interest loans to these startup founders and connects them with a vast network of Wildflower Montessori educators who share resources, offer encouragement, and provide advice and insights. Caitlin continues to run a Wildflower Microschool in Cambridge while serving as an inspiring mentor for current and aspiring Wildflower Microschool leaders across the country. Caitlin Shore, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Most of us in the team have kids, and so I think we all see the balance of spending time with our children while also aggressively moving forward with what we're trying to do with Tinkergarten. We're focused on expanding the leaders that can deliver the curriculum, so we have a setup that lets us bring these leaders in, vet them, and introduce them to the curriculum.
We want to unlock the next creator, the next maker, the next entrepreneur, the next activist.
So in data science, I want to get high quality data. So here we can actually put a region mask on top of the image. We're gonna enter the image. We're gonna submit it to the Tree of Life. We're gonna name it Mr. Squishy, and I'm gonna compose a poem to it. Poem goes here. So I had a lot of fun. I was making poems for all these bugs in the database.
Okay, so if you hear the word qualia, we are talking about philosophy of mind, and in particular, we are talking about the kinds of conscious experiences that we have. So qualia are meant to be the intrinsic qualities of conscious experience.
This is a really tough problem in computer vision, which is scene understanding, because it's not just about analyzing pixels, but about putting an interpretation on top of those pixels to understand what you're looking at. One of the hardest things in computer vision to recognize is a chair, because a chair, as defined by humans, is based on affordances. It's not how it's shaped or what it looks like, it's about what it can do. So anything that can hold a person is a chair, and that's a tricky thing to explain to a computer vision system. But now with AI and the large language models, maybe that's easier to do.
Right, nice. Warming and tasty and kind of makes you feel nice and cozy. Okay, so that kind of experience that I have when I drink tea, as opposed to, let's say, drinking an espresso, that's kind of what we're talking about, the quality of my experience. So we're not so much talking about the kind of properties that the tea has. We're talking about the way my experience feels to me from the inside.
We need diverse creators. We need storytellers of all types to step in and to produce these experiences. I do this with my students. We produce under the name Journalism. We've worked with different tech companies, media companies. We do stories about homelessness, youth in foster care, deportees. We're in post-production on a story about surviving domestic abuse. And we too use these technologies like photogrammetry, to create AR experiences. This is one, for example, where we captured a homeless dwelling, Jennifer's tent, and through photogrammetry, and I'll explain what that is in a little bit, created not an artist's interpretation of her home, but a photogrammetry-based model of her home that you can interact with, and most importantly, step inside, right? This isn't about shooting. This isn't about fighting zombies or Nazis. This is about harnessing that technology to create experiences that connect us, right? You can learn more about our work. We have apps and all that stuff. But my point for this quick intro moderator talk is to say that we need you. You're going to hear from a variety of different creators here, from big name, incredible organizations or tech companies, but you're going to hear by independent freelancers, independent journalists, as well as educators to remind you that you can be creating these stories. And quite honestly, we need you to be creating these stories. So we're not limited to murder simulators.
What did I mean when I say it's the intrinsic experience? Well, you might think that, when you have an experience, it's related to lots of different things, the outside world and what's going on in your brain. So we're kind of factoring all of that sort of stuff out. We're just talking about the experience from the inside, as it were, just from the experiencer's point of view and not in relation to all the physical stuff that might be going on in the world. When you study philosophy of mind, qualia is a topic that comes up an awful lot. Why so? Well, they're meant to be a problem for physicalist theories of the mind. How does that go? Well, it's a bit kind of fuzzy exactly what kind of problems are there, but basically it tends to go like this. Experience has this kind of intrinsic feeling, this intrinsic property. That's kind of what we're labeling with this term qualia. How are you going to explain it? As a physicalist, you've got the chemical properties of the tea itself. You've got what's going on in my body. You've got what's going on in my mind, the kind of neural stuff, the chemical stuff. But how could any of that explain why it is that a cup of tea feels the way it feels to me? Okay, why is it that it feels a certain way to me, different way to you? Why does coffee feel a different way when I drink it than tea does? Okay, how are you going to explain all of that kind of stuff just in physical, chemical, biological, or whatever terms? That's basically the problem of qualia as it affects physicalists.
I, for one, am addicted to learning. I know other people addicted to producing music. All of those are reasonable things for people to find meaning in, or personal meaning. Yeah, there's others, like I said, just want to perfect their participation in a certain sport, or I love X Games because it wasn't even remotely considered a sport not that long ago. So passions will emerge, and I think if people have very early in their life the ability to pursue passions, I hope that adds the meaning human beings will need. And in some sense, that's what I was talking about in 2000 when I said we'll have to redefine what it means to be human. Your assembly line job won't define you for your whole life.
So my name is Freeman Dyson. I'm an old physicist who has been sitting around here for about 60 years. And since my memories go back a long time, I also like to look a long time into the future. I would say the big revolution in science that I see coming is understanding the brain. To record completely what's going on in a brain, you'd have to have something like 1 billion little transmitters in the brain, which you could imagine being some tiny little objects, sort of the size of a dust grain. So the whole thing could perhaps work. I mean, it's a question whether you'd want to do that with a human being, but at least you could do it with a monkey. And so that's the kind of technology that's going to be available. If you can do that, then I would think it's very likely you can really understand in some depth really how the brain is dealing with the senses and feelings and all the rest. We know that the brain it's not just a computer. It does have emotions and feelings and all kinds of things we don't understand driving its behavior. And I think there's a good chance we could understand all that.
Although it seems like there's a big gap between collecting all of that data and then somehow backing out from those patterns, all of these things like emotions or thoughts.
In fact, that is the problem, yes, precisely. At the moment, we're drowning in information but lacking understanding. And that's, of course, will be even more so when we have this brain monitoring system. So you'll have huge amounts of information. The question is, can you understand what it's saying? And that's a big and scary possibility that we would be in control of our own minds. And it's a very dangerous thing, of course. It could be very good or it could be very bad.
Brain Tone Art is an innovative system that translates human brain waves into colors and shapes so that anyone of any ability can create beautiful artwork. We're going to put an EEG headset on him.
So we're tapping into your brain, Larry.
Absolutely. So I'll have you stand over here.
All right. And I want to emphasize too that this is on Larry, but this can be on anybody at any age.
And then you also get to choose as an artist what color palette you would like to choose.
I think I'll take black and gold since it's my favorite color.
What we're going to do is we're going to seek a cerebral connection. So stand right in front of it. So good. So it is measuring your brain waves. It's measuring the full spectrum.
See, there is something in there, Larry.
Oh, boy.
For sure.
But our system just ties two different pieces to colors and shapes. So meditation, what it does is that it ties it to the color. That's how uncluttered you can get your mind. And I'm very impressed that you can do that with everything that's going on right now. We also have focus, and focus will change the shapes. If you're very focused, it'll be sharp. You're focusing on what I'm talking about.
All right.
And so I'm just going to push start. Every he moves his head is where it's going to start painting. And it's just a snapshot of what's going on in his mind at this moment. That's really impressive, actually. He's doing a sustained meditation, which means that he's in a certain area for a long time, and very few people can actually do that. So every 10 seconds, what it does is it takes a picture of what's going on in his mind.
And really, it's pretty. I mean, it's something that you would conceivably put on your walls. It's gorgeous. We mentioned before that pretty much anybody has the opportunity to do this at any age range, from a child as young as 2 on up.
Absolutely. Yeah, my daughter made one yesterday, and the meditation was very low, not a lot of clutter going on in her mind. It was really cool to see. But yeah, anyone, whether it's someone who's a CEO of a Fortune 500 company or whether it's, 7-year-old with cerebral palsy, the playing field is leveled with Brain Tone Art.
The traditions that I'm speaking about, Mr. Gurdjieff's tradition of the fourth way, was preceded by many thousands of years by the Taoist tradition, which from my studies also is connected with this fourth way. And the Taoist tradition, which was actually the beginning of the explanation by the Lama, because the Taoist tradition doesn't believe in what would be complete emptiness, but rather they begin not with complete emptiness, but with a void that is not empty. That is, it's full of potential. And this is like 0. You can represent it by a 0, and you can represent the beginning of the unified force of consciousness as 1. When you reflect upon this unified force, this initial force, like we are now reflecting on it, then 1 duplicates itself. So it's 0, 1, 1. And these add together to form 2, which is represented by the symbol of yin and yang, including both the idea of materialization and spiritualization at the same time. That these two do not have to be separated. So that the proto-science of the Taoist begins with this idea of 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, which many recognize as the beginning of the Fibonacci series, the life spiral. At the point of 2, though, there is a division. 2 is just like 0, 1 in the computer, and in fact, when you square this binomial A plus B or yin and yang, you create a square, and from a square, you take it to a cube, and from a cube, you begin to move it into space and time.
Morning with Rev Lebaradian from NVIDIA, your colleague, Neil. And Rev is the guy who's, he's taking everything that the other guy said and he's doing it. Omniverse is actually has USD at its core. And, so Rev made a lot of interesting representation about Omniverse. Neil, you want to talk to that?
I mean, there were a couple of examples that Rev was using, digital, because he was focused on using on use case for metaverse in industrial rather than consumer and gaming. So it was an interesting, different perspective. Digital twins was one of the use cases. Now, what happens? What can you do if you connect the real and virtual worlds, and all kinds of insights can happen, not just in real time, but if you have enough processing power to start simulating the real world as to what might happen, and if you can do that quickly enough, fast enough, you can begin to predict the future. So that's a very interesting framing of the power of high performance simulation, trying out different future scenarios. Very powerful, interesting idea.
You actually called it out as superpowers, right? If I remember well.
Superpowers, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What's interesting to the system about humans is that we have a certain amount of randomness and unpredictability, and that is part of the modeling for nonlinear systems. And that's something that Stan Ulam, who is in that photo, focused on. He helped develop the hydrogen bomb, but had all sorts of anxiety and eventually had a condition that led him, I don't know if he was institutionalized mentally or for physical exhaustion, but they said you have to turn your mind off and just do other things. And he was doing solitaire and card games. And so then he in developing that, a language of risk called the Monte Carlo method. So using what they call degrees of freedom or variables to make predictions about the future based on the information at hand that is incomplete information. And so when we're looking at the picture of von Neumann, Feynman, and Stan Ulam, Ulam's focus is statistics and probability and risk when you do not know all the information. And that's what he is very important at. And I think that is why the gaming is important, because the gaming is pulling in the unpredictability and the emergent potential of the players in the game, the agents, the people with the digital wallets, but not just people. If nature's going to have a digital wallet and an iPhone, to steer towards these emergent properties.
That you were really at the very ground level of launching Wildflower back in 2014, and now it has grown into something truly spectacular across the country, inspiring more and more teacher entrepreneurs to launch Wildflower affiliated microschools. What is the origin story of Wildflower? How did you and Sep get connected? What were sort of the early conversations around this idea for what would become this extraordinary network of microschools that were Montessori inspired? What was that like back in those early days?
It was so incredible, just sort of imagining what we could do and then doing it. And having that ability to think about what could be possible and then take one step at a time to create just one school is really what we were thinking about, as one micro school. And my path crossed with Sep as he was just imagining Wildflower. He had read a lot about Montessori. He had gone to Montessori. He had a son who was 2, and he was really thinking about what is the place that I would like to see, not just for my son, but for my family. So those early conversations were about, how do we create beautiful, authentic Montessori environments where the person who is making the decision about children is the one who's also engaging parents, who can think about the holistic life of a whole school, and what could that mean beyond that classroom? What could it mean for the city? What could it mean for the neighborhood? What could it mean for the city to see children as an important part of the community, and for children to see themselves as an important part of the city?
We are sensors. We have 5 senses. Some would argue more. And we go out in the world and we observe things, and then we interpret those observations and we can share those.
So those early conversations were really dreaming about what could be possible by having a small school in the neighborhood. And Seth definitely tells the story better than I do, but he saw a shopfront open and took the leap and got it.
And so the beginning of the Taoist concept is that the binomial yin and yang, A plus B, to the 6 powers becomes what is called the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, which shows all the basic permutations that can occur from the addition of these two different concepts, yin and yang. At the same time that we have these very symmetrical, very linear sort of view, which I think was very well represented here in this conference, there's also another viewpoint, which is that as you move through the development of the world, you move into a triad, and which is represented in the yin-yang symbol by the interface, the S, and also the fact of it's encompassing both factors, male, female, dark and light, and so on. From here, it goes to 5, because 3 plus 2 is 5. It's simply additive. And you have the 5 elements, which you also find in other systems. 5 elements is the beginning of what you call function and what you call form. So all these things that we were talking about in dealing with function and form, even with the human brain, which is a form, is far down the scale. And if we begin to work, to meditate, to observe ourselves, we want to move back up the scale towards the one, towards the evolving back into the one, unity, and back into the non-emptiness, the void that is not empty, where all the potential exists. So from the point of view of the Taoists, you have these 5 elements, and you have, from there, you have all the organs of the body, you have all the colors, you have all the smells, you have all the senses. And from here, you move from the creation of a form to the potential perfection of the form, which again is bringing in new ideas. It brings in the idea of air, of breathing. Now, some people have spoken about energy and spoken about how you eat food and you gain energy. Of course, this is quite true. You also gain energy from air. And if you take in air consciously, you begin to gain more energy. And that's part of the main function, the main purpose of human beings, to receive, to accumulate not only just energy of the physical level of the food, but energy of higher levels, which include the air we breathe and also the impressions we take in, the light we take in through our eyes, the sound we take in through our ears. This is also a food. This is also an energy that our body can incorporate. The main difference between, I think, the viewpoints that are often represented here and the viewpoints of proto-science is that we are not, we did not come from a lower place. On one hand, yes, we did. We can see it in our bodies. We have iron in our blood, for example. We have minerals. But at the same time, we came from a much higher place, a much deeper place. And when we forget that, when we turn only towards the lower, only towards the manifestations of form and function, then we lose something which is inherently human, inherently important for us. So right now, what I would like to do is speak a little bit about something which is common both to Taoism and to the Gurdjieff work, which is this idea of self-observation. Because it's fundamental, the witness to this conscious force. How can I be a witness to my own life, to my own body sitting here? Am I aware that I'm sitting here? This self-awareness is the beginning of real evolution. So if you're sitting there and you have no relationship to your body, no relationship to your posture, to your form, then you lose something very vital in this equation. Can you be aware of yourself? Is it possible? If you can be, then it's possible to create a practice in which day by day you increasingly become more aware of yourself and you are able to see yourself. As Socrates says, to know yourself. How can you know yourself if you don't pay attention to yourself? If you don't look and see what happens in yourself? The second thing that the Gurdjieff work speaks about, which I think is very interesting, is that we need to remember ourselves. We need to feel who we are. We need to be present in our feelings as well as in our mind. Our mind is not enough. And here we perhaps differ with the Buddhist teachings because the emotions are not the enemy, just as the body is not the enemy. The emotions are part of the human experience. I think as the Archbishop was saying before, this is part of life, part of our gift for being here. But emotions are overrated because they're mostly reactions. So what we want to come to, if it's possible, is to feeling, is a kind of awareness, a feeling of myself now, that I'm here, that I actually exist. I'm not just a virtual reality. I'm actually a person in this body. So if you're not aware that you're in this body now, you might try it just as an experiment. Many scientists here try it as an experiment. How could I be aware of myself in this body? Even just my sensations, my feet on the ground, my butt on the chair, looking out at you. So real observation begins with looking inside at the same moment that I'm also looking out. These two must occur together. And then I see that I have an inner world and an outer world. And I begin to feel myself, I begin to awaken to myself. And all the powers that exist within the human being, which are trying to be replicated by machines, we have not explored at all. These powers that exist within us, which includes potentially telepathic powers and many others, exist already inside of us. So I would like to express this possibility to you, that you also can gain more powers and become more human than you are now.
With the desktop app, you should certify. This is the connection between blockchain identity and simple authentication. We'd sign in with MetaMask. We would certify our submissions. We sign them and say, yeah, this is mine. I own this in the blockchain. And we can take a look at the leaderboard. These are the current top bugs. So we can swipe left and right. Love it, love it, love it. Don't like him. Cool. That's the game. So guys, you can jump on to the game. I want to play this game. We built it. We want to play it. My office is in Tiergarten. I'm going to send an invite. I want people running around. I'll be there playing with it. So in a couple weeks, yeah, let's make it happen. So thanks a lot, guys.
My mother has become, in running the Bezos Family Foundation, she has become an expert in early education. I'm a student of Montessori schools. I started at Montessori when I was 2 years old, and the teacher complained to my mother, the Montessori school teacher complained to my mother that I was too task focused and that she couldn't get me to switch tasks, so she would have to just pick up my chair and move me.
Started the partnership with the Bezos Academy is that we put our students first, and we asked ourselves, who else can help us raise the whole child and add value to the Tacoma community?
Hey, it's tuition free.
Have big emotions.
It's giving access to parents who may work full-time who want their kids to be in a quality school system and not having to pay the extreme prices.
In Tacoma, we have Montessori preschools throughout town. Sometimes they're public, sometimes they're private. And so the opportunity to add to that portfolio of options for our families was a no-brainer.
This mirrors the decentralized consensus or social contract formed in Bitcoin. Each participant in Bitcoin
voluntarily chooses how they wish to participate, and the aggregate consensus represents the network.
And the Mind Everywhere project?
Yeah, I mean, this is both of these projects are key elements of that. I think better conceptual foundations, better computer models of what it takes to scale cognition. You know, this idea of the cognitive glue. What is it? It enables competent individuals, like cells or even molecular networks, to scale up into larger IQ individuals that solve problems in other spaces, bigger boundaries of the self, and so on. So these two projects are part of it. There are many other projects that contribute as well.
The Los Alamos feeds into the Santa Fe Institute. This Game B also involves Jordan Hall and Vanessa Hall, his wife, who are both into psychotechnology and neurohacking and various sorts of biohacking, including nootropics, so getting into altered states of mind. So if they're going to use our biology and our spirit and our psyche as a computational mechanism, there are these various tools to enhance the information that they're getting, some of which are plant medicines or other kinds of chemical systems, or even just non-substance but mindfulness practices to get us into an altered state to access group mind and advance ego death.
Wildflower, I started because I was thinking about preschools for my son at the time, who was 2. And I was really struck by the Montessori method. I felt like the children were so peaceful, so independent, so interdependent. There was a special quality to the classroom.
I'm here tonight on behalf of the Wildflower Montessori. I actually just got done with my preschooler who's in Montessori's parent-teacher conference. She's 4.5, and they already have parent-teacher conferences. And I just want to express how incredibly rigorous it is, but still such a welcoming and creative environment. And those two things don't always go together. And she has done nothing but flourish. And she has done nothing but flourish. And she has done nothing but flourish.
And he's a financial cryptographer. What are you doing with a bunch of flowers in your hands?
I'm making money.
How?
What we're doing is picking these flowers. We take these flowers and we press them. We'll do this in spring. We'll press the flowers. And then in the summer or in the late autumn, we'll take out the pressings and we'll place them into laminates. And these laminates will become hand-to-hand money or hand-to-hand favor payments, which we can use to reward the good things that have been done for us by other people.
Over here, we have the Santa Fe Institute that was founded, fairly recently, 1983. It was also home to John Henry Holland, who was the father of genetic algorithms. And again, all of this social evolution is being guided through an algorithmic process. Let's see, it was initially funded by John Reed of Citigroup. So the field, they pioneered the field of econophysics, melding economic modeling with physics, but then also it's overlapping with the biophysics as well.
Okay, so and what's your part as a cryptographer in the process?
Well, it's a funny story. It's a long story. I have a digital money system, and in that digital money system, we can have contracts. We can have any sort of money you like. And the way to do this is to write a long contract with very boring legal terms, but you can put anything you like in there. And it turns out that somebody created a contract made of, or backed with, as we say, reserved with, pressed flowers. And this woman called Sylvia Burnt, her name is Sylvia Burnt, she created a contract which was issued into my money system. And so we have something like 800 or 900 of these digital pressed flowers out in the internet amongst various people, and they're being traded occasionally for just small game things, small fun things. And it wasn't until we got to here, to Vienna, to the Austrian arts community, that they took these pressed flowers and migrated them from the digital into the physical. and actually picked up some pressed flowers and put them into laminates. And now we have a form of token money, which we can use to pay for favors and so forth.
Yeah, it's coming together. I mean, the question is it going to be in a centralized manner where one company or one person sits in the middle and says, here's how it's going to be, here's what you're going to build? Or are we instead going to create an environment where a lot of people can try different things? And I think that the latter approach is messier in some ways, and
who's the lead on that approach?
Who's
Who
the
do you
lead?
think should be leading that approach globally?
Well, I'm happy to state my opinions, but my
I guess
opinion.
that's the beauty of it. It's decentralized. It comes to some sort of global consensus.
I'm going to shill Neil here as a good person to point the way. I mean, that's sort of, Lamina, the goal of it is like building the open metaverse. So
Your new project, Lamina. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's a blockchain and an ecosystem and community to build the open metaverse. And I will say what Neil won't say, which is like, it should be Neil at least pointing the way for people was my feeling when we talked about doing this. But that's different than a company dictating, right? We're in crypto, so we know it's a huge community building what they see.
What is Bitcoin's role in the metaverse?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Bitcoin is like the gold standard of crypto, so I think it's important. But of course, transaction volumes, speed, all of those things mean that it's probably not a good fundamental underlying tech for a lot of the stuff that we need.
It's not what you would start with if you were starting from scratch to create a base layer to run a metaverse. Bitcoin per se is very good at doing certain things that it was designed to do, but a new design approach is needed for a new problem.
Welcome. This week, we are doing an AMA on metaverse identity, and we are joined by three very special guests. So we're joined by Lamina One co-founder Neil Stevenson, the godfather of the metaverse, and author of Snow Crash, Cryptonomicon, The Diamond Age, and countless other books informing the future of the digital age as we know it. We're also going to be joined for today's AMA with Mario Yuksedig, an engineer and cryptographer at Lamina One, who's been spearheading our identity light paper efforts, as well as special guest Dele Atonda, who is the CEO at MetaMe, who recently joined on as the partner with Lamina One and has been working for the last 12 years at the intersection of identity, AI, blockchain, metaverse storytelling, and a bunch of all really cool stuff. And we're super excited to bring on as an expert for this session. He and Neil met actually last year at the Lamina One launch, and we've had some amazing talks on metaverse identity earlier this week, and wanted to kind of pull him in for what's going to be a really fun conversation on what I'm sure we can all agree is one of the kind of like most pressing and interesting topics in the metaverse today.
Was in public policy thinking about issues. This was around 2003 to 2007, and then I went to law school during the financial crisis and studied financial markets pretty deeply, and then became an entrepreneur, stumbled across Glenn's book, DM'd him on Twitter, thought this was really interesting. I thought a lot of the ideas he proposed was kind of a third way between the left and the right, and resolved a lot of interesting issues while raising new issues. And through Glenn, I became introduced to Radical Exchange and Audrey Tong, who I found to be a total inspiration in her movement in digital democracy in Taiwan. And so that has been my entry point, more from the social political innovation lens, and also in crypto as well. I've always been interested in the social and political ramifications of crypto.
So let's just give a really basic definition of today's topic, soulbound tokens, and also talk about where this concept originates from.
Yeah, so soulbound tokens was an idea that Vitalik discussed in January, and he basically described it as just a non-transferable token, a non-transferable NFT, basically. And this has a bunch of different types of antecedents, one of which is World of Warcraft, and the fact that there's lots of items in World of Warcraft that are not just like tradable swords or something like that, but that are actually attached to a character, like wings. And that was, Vitalik's inspiration. There's an enormous community of people who've been working on things related to decentralized identity for years, who have been thinking about things that have that basic structure for a long time. And we can get into some of the details of that later. But this attempt to connect it to all the exciting energy around new forms of social and economic organization within the Web3 community was really what I think the contribution that Vitalik's paper made was. And that's really what we tried to emphasize in this paper. So soul-bound tokens is more of a general allusion to this notion of these non-transferable statements about people that are at least partly public so they can interact with dApps. It's not really a full technical specification. And the emphasis of the paper, at least as we intended it, was to be on opening people's eyes to both the near-term and really ambitious longer-term applications that these could enable, and sort of painting a socio-technical picture there, rather than to focus primarily on the design of a particular standard, which, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of work on for some time, and there's continuing suggestions about, and happy to discuss that. But the intention of the paper is really around illustrating all the things that this can make possible when it interacts with the energy in the Web3 ecosystem.
And beyond, right? So why stop at Mars? What about exploring the cosmos? Now, there's a hitch. You might think, we've got Earth, we've got Mars. And beyond that, though, the next closest planet is Proxima Centauri. It's 4 light years away, but at maximum speeds of today's travel flights, it will take 81,000 years. Oops. So, and Charlie Stross, the sci-fi author, I love this quote. He says, "Sending canned primates was never going to end happily," right? We're basically primates in tin cans flying around the cosmos. So taking 81,000 years to get there is probably not going to work. So I could expand this slide into a whole talk, and I have before, but there is a lot of reason to see, can we migrate our minds into a better substrate, right? My view is, as humans, it's not about my body, it's about my mind, my patterns of thought that are in my brain and my body and how they're manifested, right? And then, once we have that, we can explore the cosmos. And there's at least 2 credible ways. There's uploads, and this is a question of brain scanning that gets higher and higher resolution over time. And then a bandwidth plus scenario. Think like iPhone 25. Once we go beyond the smartphones where we're talking with texting, we can keep going. So there are some credible ways to get here. It's nothing in the next 5 years, but 20, 30, 50 years from now, 100, this is where we could be heading. And this is great because what it means is we can explore the cosmos. And oh, by the way, if AI ever does wake up, that's okay, because now we have a competitive substrate.
I'm going to warn you, I'm an emotional person, so I might get emotional. This is my daughter, Abigail. I'm Danny. My daughter, Abigail. Sorry. Do we get 6 minutes since we're 2 people? I'm just kidding. We're here on behalf of the Wildflower Montessori School, and something that has been noted, of course, is the beauty that is found within the Montessori method.
Cryptographer Ian Greek. So you're back again in Amstetten. It's November, and you've been here in May. So what happens in the meantime? We collected some flowers, and I see they are pressed now.
Yes, the flowers have been in the press for the last 6 months or so, and they're now completely flattened and ready for lamination.
This is a reversible state in which all metabolic processes stop, including development, repair, and reproduction. This state is peculiar because organisms that enter it appear dead physiologically, and yet they are still very much alive. It's why this strategy has been compared to death and resurrection. Cryptobiosis is used to overcome periods of extreme environmental conditions, such as oxygen deficiency, freezing, and desiccation. There are 5 types, and they're seen across the plant and animal kingdom. But in animals, cryptobiosis is mainly used by invertebrates.
So Weiner and the guys said, this is a nice image. It's not a nice word. I've cursed it ever since. People say, cybernetics, what's that? I had an immigration officer in New York said to me, I used to have cybernetician in my passport till I realised it was too much trouble. I now have professor. Everybody knows that. You've got a beard, okay. So this immigration officer said to me, cybernetician, I know what that is. You freeze dead people. Have you heard of cryogenics? So, confusion.
Tardigrades are well known for their cryptobiotic ability. These microscopic invertebrates can be found all over the world, from freshwater ecosystems to terrestrial. To remain active, they need a film of water around their bodies, and yet they can still live in extreme environments, all thanks to cryptobiosis. In experiments, tardigrades have survived temperatures as low as minus 200 degrees Celsius and as high as 150 degrees Celsius, far above the boiling point of water. They've even survived the burning UV radiation in space. So how does cryptobiosis work? When cryptobiosis is triggered by desiccation, tardigrades lose up to 97% of their body moisture and shrivel down to 1/3 their original size, essentially dehydrating themselves. In this state, metabolic activity drops to as low as 0.01% of normal levels. They also produce different proteins unique to them, known as TDPs, which protect their cells from DNA damage during dehydration. In a process called vitrification, TDPs turn the contents of cells into glass, so that tardigrades are mummified in a glass suit of armor. This occurs possibly to lock everything in place, preventing cells from unfolding, breaking apart, or collecting together. Unlike normal folded proteins, TDPs have an unstable 3D structure, which allows them to take on different forms under different environmental conditions. But these conditions that tardigrades can tolerate are actually quite similar anyway. Freezing removes water from cells, similar to desiccation, and radiation can also cause DNA damage. TDPs may provide an interesting evolutionary example of cross-tolerance, when something that's evolved to cope with one stress also gives protection to another. This is what makes tardigrades one of the toughest animals on the planet. There are around 1,300 known species of tardigrades.
China successfully inserted a gene from tardigrades, commonly known as water bears, into human embryonic stem cells. This genetic modification has significantly enhanced the cell's ability to withstand radiation. These extraordinary traits are attributed in part to a specific gene that enables them to produce protective proteins, shielding their cells from the harmful effects of radiation and other environmental factors. Using the gene editing tool CRISPR-Cas9, the researchers successfully integrated the tardigrade gene into human DNA. In laboratory experiments, nearly 90% of human embryonic cells carrying the water bear gene could withstand lethal doses of X-ray radiation. They emphasized the uncertainty surrounding the immune response triggered by the unique protective proteins found in water bears. These considerations raised safety concerns, as previous studies have indicated potential failures in gene transfer between vastly different animal species. However, the experiment yielded surprising results, as human cells were compatible with the tardigrade gene. The researchers affirmed that the experiment maintained cell viability and facilitated cell proliferation to some extent. Encouraged by these findings, one of the team's future goals is to transform embryonic stem cells modified with the tardigrade gene into blood-producing cells. This advancement holds the potential for addressing acute radiation sickness, or ARS, a significant medical concern faced by military personnel, civilians, and emergency workers during nuclear accidents and acts of terrorism. Implanting these modified cells into the bone marrow could increase the chances of survival in apocalyptic scenarios by generating radiation-resistant blood cells.
This is about the quantum tardigrade. It's Schrodinger's tardigrade. They took the first animal in nature and they've made it in a quantum state. They took 2 tardigrades and they were like, can you sit on this little silver plate and the silver plates will be, what's the word? Entangled? Can you sit here nice and be all entangled in quantum position? And the tardigrades, yeah, we'll try. And then they died. But then the one tardigrade, he's from Denmark.
You know those moss piglets from Denmark are tough. They can survive quantum entanglement.
The tardigrade went to sleep and he was like, oh, I wonder what's going on. I'm just gonna be in a coma. Then they brought the temperature even further down to absolute zero. It's colder than the vacuum of space, Alec. And that's how we get quantum entanglement stuff on a macro scale. But they took the tardigrade and quantum positioned it with the silver plate. I like to think of the silver plate as like a little backpack, and there's another backpack over there that does exactly the same thing. It is in two spots at the same time. It is both here and also there. They took a tiny little tardigrade and it woke up after and it was like, I don't know what just happened, but maybe I got superpowers now. Not yet, because that's not how science works. But it could. Obviously scientists are like, oh, you didn't really quantum entangle it. But guess what? It's the closest we've ever gotten to quantum entanglement of an animal. And you're gonna ruin it with science questions? I mean, good for you. You should actually question things. That's a good idea. It was both there and not there at the same time. Think of all the things you could do now.
I was at UCLA studying physics. I've always been interested in the foundations of physics, the deepest aspects of nature. And obviously, quantum mechanics is at the most foundational level. What the group was working on was quantum electronics, superconducting electronics. So that had the promise of operating much, much faster, 1,000 times faster, with 1,000 times less energy consumption, right? And this would be able to extend Moore's law well into the future. And in 1997, I think it was, there was a lecture entitled Quantum Computing by a guy named John Preskill, a very a well-known and respected theoretical physicist. And I knew what quantum mechanics was, I knew what computing was, but I didn't know what they had to do with each other. It wasn't the buzzword that it is today. So I went to that lecture, and I took Arnold Silver, the inventor of the squid, with me, and a couple other people from TRW. And we went to this lecture, and it blew my mind. Sort of this Alice in Wonderland stuff. I mean, one interpretation for quantum mechanics is that there's parallel universes, right? And that when you look at the quantum mechanical equations and they tell you that all these disparate physical phenomena are happening at the same time, like the same physical object being in many places at once, or living out many possibilities simultaneously, that kind of thing. The idea is, the basic idea behind quantum computing is if I can have single objects live out many possibilities simultaneously, what if I could have computing elements, the same physical hardware, behave as if it was many, many pieces of hardware, or one processor operating like it's an incredible number of processors operating in parallel, doing different parts of a very difficult problem.
Trisolarans had much longer lifespans than humans and could live for hundreds of years, or between 700 and 800,000 trisolaran hours. But it is mentioned that most trisolarans will lose the ability to work productively long before that period of time. Once this happens, those trisolaran individuals would be dehydrated forcibly and burned. If trisolarans could not work, they were not considered of use to their civilization. The trisolarans also have the ability to fully dehydrate themselves and exist in an unconscious state indefinitely, only to be rehydrated at a later time. This was the adaptation which had allowed them to be able to survive the harsh conditions of their 3-star solar system. Their planet existed in a constant state of varying extremes, which came about suddenly. Some eras were stable, but there was no way to tell how long stable eras would last, or to predict when stable eras would occur. This is the three-body problem, which the title of the book refers to.
What we do is we take our laminate, which is this pouch or plastic, open it up, insert a flower inside, and then we feed that into the lamination machine, and out comes a fully formed token like these, which I've just made earlier. It takes about 30 seconds. And we have, hey presto, our tokens.
A symbol of hard work, of skills. People wage wars over it, big and small, concerned more with growing interest on $244 trillion in debt than growing communities. And many people are left out. But what if money were more accessible to everyone? A universal symbol for essential needs, for empowerment and connection. People, communities, entire countries prospering. What if money were all of this? What if money were beautiful?
Currency systems. So there's biological currency systems with ATP and ADP.
I would say that that currency is a channel that facilitates flows of energy, stocks, information, correct? And so we use the word currency metaphorically to talk about channels of information, correct? But we also use it to talk about channels of energy, be it chemical energy or electrical energy, current, or biological, metabolic energy, correct? So I think currencies are forms of enabling constraints, right?
I mean, not only have we got this idea now, but we've quantified it, and by golly, it works, you see. Now, this kind of thing was what set everybody alight, and everybody saying, my God, we're onto something. So they said, well, what is it? It's a science of control of some kind. But after all, let's remember that we've already said that control is a very trivial idea, to think that control means beating people over the head or pulling levers. It's much more subtle than that.
This reminds me a lot of the kind of opening talk you gave at Cello Connect.
I was reading this book called The Hidden Life of Trees, and it talked about mycelial networks, which we know above ground to be mushrooms. But underground, there's thousands of miles of mycelial network in every square foot of forest. It looks like a nervous system. In fact, I'd argue that it is a nervous system. It's a biological network that passes messages and performs computations. In a world where we know that our own intelligence arises from the complexity of our own neural networks, what does that say about the intelligence of a forest whose neural networks are much richer than ours? If a forest has a nervous system, what is the organism? Is it the forest or is it the tree? And the only conclusion that I can come to is that we are at every level, from cell all the way to Earth, we are both ecosystem and organism.
The more we learn about the microbes and how many there are and what they're doing and functioning, the more we'll understand organisms and the more we'll understand evolution. The main driving force in evolution, in our opinion, is not mutation, that has been thought about for 100 years, mutation, but more likely the uptake of microbial genes and microbes themselves. As one physicist once told me, when I told him it makes much more sense to take genes that are already developed rather than to make new ones by evolution, because bacteria have done this, he said, yeah, it's like an app. When I want an app, I don't make my own app. I take somebody else's app and put it in. So I think evolution proceeds that way.
In 50 years, biotech would have reached the point where we can grow things rather than making them, so that a very large amount of our industry sort of will be converted to biotech instead of manufacturing things in the old-fashioned way, which has to be done in big quantities. You grow them, so that all you need is just to write out the genetic instructions, and the super chicken or whatever it is produces all the stuff that you want. So chairs and tables and windows and cups and saucers and cars and airplanes, whatever it is, maybe it could all be grown. And that will, of course, be a new art form. It will be a profound change in the way we do things.
So this would be growing inert, inorganic objects using a biological system?
It would be just as we use wood for making tables today. Wood is a biological material, but you could do a lot more. You could have the table grow itself instead of having to be made. If I'm right, it will happen in about 50 years. And of course, it will be very helpful to the poor countries, which can all do biology. in poor countries are not well supplied with minerals or not well supplied with fuel under present conditions. But everybody has sunlight and everybody has plants. And so that's what you need for doing biology. So I think it will be, in the end, a way of evening out the wealth.
I see the day, as we learn more about what microbes are doing, is that when you get sick, you go to a microbiologist, not to a doctor, to give you the right kinds of microbes or the right kind of food to develop the right kinds of microbes.
So, my friends, we forgot the paint. What are we going to do? Where can we find colors? Do you see any colors around us, my friends?
We are both a whole and a part. And you know, the science fiction writer Arthur Koestler had a word for this. He called them holons, which is something that is simultaneously a whole and a part. And he said the universe is composed of interlocking holons.
Close off by hearing your kind of quick thoughts on morphic resonance.
The basic formula for change making that we kind of take for granted in this society, which is you identify a bad guy and then you defeat the bad guy by force. You never ask, why is the bad guy bad? Why are certain people seemingly so greedy? And sometimes maybe you do have to fight Pluto, but if that's all you do, you're in endless war. So the principle of morphic resonance is one of the alternatives to solving problems through overcoming something by force. And the paradigm of overcoming by force, it's also like at the core of what we understand to be technology, where you're moving masses around by exerting forces on them. And progress in technology means more and more accurately doing that with more and more force.
It does not transfer energy. It creates the conditions that allow energy to flow more easily and therefore accelerates a particular reaction. It's almost like bulldozing the terrain. You know, you're not pushing the entity, but if you create a slope by providing more resources, then water will naturally flow in that direction, if you will. Shorter feedback loops is important because the shorter the feedback loop, the more embedded you are in the context. The longer the loop takes to complete, the farther away you are from the output that you want information back on. The more variety of components, and more variety does not mean more of them, does not mean numerically. It means literally different types of components. You know, that helps with the flexibility, that helps with the facilitation of the potential for a new emergence. So you can't force a new emergence. You can't push a new emergence. You can create the conditions that make it happen. And that's all I'm calling enabling constraints, conditions that lower barriers to energy flow in the direction you want it, or maybe raise barriers to energy flow in the directions you don't want it, or that you think will create an emergent property. You may be wrong, but that's what I think an enabling constraint does.
We have to tap into a different theory of change. And the one that you mentioned is morphic resonance, which says that any change that happens in one place creates a field of change so that the same change happens in other places. And that means, so any act of kindness, any act of generosity, it creates a field of kindness, a field of generosity, which means that your individual choices in the most intimate circumstances, the most humble circumstances, have a bigger effect on the world than the force-based mentality could conceive of. And it also has a bearing on projects like Celo or some of the cryptocurrencies, all of these And whatever beautiful project you have, like sometimes part of the mind is like, but this is just such a tiny drop in the bucket compared to everything that's happening in the world. Yet, by devoting to something that calls to your love and to your care and to your ideals, you're also instigating a morphic field, a field of change. And it could spread in ways that don't depend on how much marketing force you have behind it. One of the ways a morphic field spreads is through inspiration. Somebody hears about it, and there's maybe even more mysterious ways that it spreads.
And Warren Buffett's cohort, Charlie Munger, they worked together for decades, has this wonderful quote: "Show me the incentive, and I will show you the outcome." So it all comes down to the incentives, how the incentives are structured, and from that, many, many, many things emerge. And you might ask, well, that's a cool quote, Trent, but what can you do about that, right? So, how do you engineer incentives? How do you structure incentives? Now, until recently, the way that you would have to do it is through economic institutions that come from politics and otherwise. But now there's a new way. And the new way is something that I like to call incentive machines. And that is blockchains. Now, blockchains have lots of cool powers, right? Some of the powers are things like, well, they're decentralized. No single entity owns or controls them. They're immutable. When you write something to a blockchain, it's there for good. You can have assets, but there's a superpower. It's the most important feature of blockchains. And that is, you can get people to do stuff. How? By rewarding them with tokens. That sounds super simple, but it's kind of amazing. So you're literally printing magic inherent money, whether it be Bitcoin or your own token, and whenever people do stuff that is of value to the network, then the network will reward them.
What is your quadrant chart? Oh, yes. So having discovered the importance of maintenance and in essence, creating health rather than chasing after it and trying to fix it when it's too late, I started something that's called Wellville, which very briefly is a 10-year nonprofit project, started in 2014, ends at the end of 2024. And the goal is in 5 small communities to actually help them create an environment that fosters health. And this is less about the healthcare system, more about school and childcare and prenatal coaching and a whole lot of mental health issues, helping to give people the resilience and the mental comfort so that they don't become addicted to drugs or food or alcohol or whatever. And so what we learned and what we finally realized, every outfit needs a quadrant chart with 4 quadrants, and of course the best one is the upper right-hand corner. The quadrant chart down here in the lower left is someone with an addiction lying in the road. Along comes a benevolent billionaire, gives him $1,000. And the reality is probably it goes to more drugs and changes nothing. So you have this short-term thing that's not a solution. The guy is benevolent but doesn't help. Then he goes off and wants to be a longevity billionaire, invests in how can he live forever. So he's thinking long-term, but all about himself. Then with luck, he thinks about his grandkids and the world they're going to live in. And of course, he's going to be there too. Maybe he should invest on behalf of everybody. Maybe he should try and even out some of the disparities in income and healthcare access and so forth. And so here is long-term equitable well-being, and that's what we're driving towards, whether it's changing individuals' behavior or the behavior of the agencies and institutions and care organizations in the communities we live in. So that's our quadrant chart. We want to look at the number of transitions to diabetes, the projected death rate, stuff like that. But what really matters is how many kids graduate from high school? How many people are not addicted? How many people are working in jobs that are meaningful? I can look at a 3rd grade class. I can see some of the kids are already getting plump, and I can predict really bad stuff.
Waterloo Playground is a place where you could say is a sign of hope for a community that was in despair, a community that was looking for some type of change.
Smart Clay is a project to help us design better playgrounds. And why this is so important is that we look at playgrounds not only as a place where children play, but as a public health intervention. If we design better playgrounds, kids will be more active and the risk for chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes and obesity will be decreased.
The prediction is fine. Society needs to do something about it. And probably the most interesting thing that AI and big data can do is not predicting this kid's going to be sick, but actually giving us more robust information about the counterfactual. Because if you don't have a counterfactual, then you can't figure out how much money you're going to save.
We can use these incentive machines, these blockchains, to change the incentives. So in the case of data, we want to shift this shelling point, this natural default, from siloing data to pooling data. And then when the pooling of the data is happening, the data is made more available to everybody, then things can change and we no longer have these data silos. Instead, we have a democracy around data itself.
But you can be sure that any devoted attempt to bring into materiality, bring into this material social world, the ideals of interconnection, ecology, interbeing, the uniqueness and relatedness of all things, like these principles that are behind the founding of Salo, for example, like any attempt to do that with devotion will have an impact far beyond what we could predict.
When we talk about it in the context of, when we think about it in the context of traditional economic theory that posits that we are all selfish, competing agents, individual agents, it's a very different starting point to think about the systems that one might imagine.
We have here a couple of the pressed flowers that will soon be turned into the flower currency.
The vision of Wildflower, which was introduced by Sepp Kamvar at the MIT Media Lab, was to create an open source network of intentionally small storefront neighborhood Montessori microschools that would offer the tools and technology to enable teacher entrepreneurs across the country to launch their own microschools. Caitlin's school would be the prototype. Today, the Wildflower Montessori Network consists of more than 60 microschools across the US and Puerto Rico, including public charter microschools in Minneapolis, New York City, and a new one this year in Washington, D.C. Most of the network's microschools focus on early childhood education, but some also serve elementary and secondary school children.
And there is this nice statement, Geld lehrt beten, money teaches you how to pray. So I think it's a little nice philosophical joke here beneath our flowers. Here's Stefan Lutschinger, a philosopher from Vienna, Austria. Maybe you could comment on the project of turning flowers into a currency. How does it work?
It's a very interesting question, Johannes. The basic question is, will this money be backed in real currency by some local resident in Amstetten? And will this flower currency so be able to be turned in a valuable currency for local use?
Okay, so maybe we should ask the question in Greek. So how is this currency backed?
This currency is not backed at all. What happens with money is that one of the things that we have to do is create a money which is very valuable but is totally useless for any other purpose. This is the theory of money. And gold, for example, is not very useful, but it is very pretty, very beautiful, and therefore it's collectible. It's very, very collectible and quite rare. So what we do here is we find flowers are extremely beautiful. We can put our own effort into them, and that way, because these each take some minutes to produce and some minutes to collect and all those trips into the country, there is a limit to the amount that each person can produce. There's a scarcity involved. We have the beauty, we have the scarcity. If we put these into the hands of people, they become collectible, and therefore they acquire their value, not backed by reserves or currency, but backed by effort, by personal effort.
Okay, so here you have like so-called real, here like the flower currency, and here's real currency.
Yes.
There are 100 euro,
50
Mexican money, yes.
pesos in Mexico, Banco de Mexico.
Okay.
Here's 100 of the local units.
Okay.
You see how the artists have gone to extreme effort to make these pretty, beautiful,
Okay.
to give you respect for the amount of money that these are worth. That's what we're doing here. Our artists are working to create objects of art. These are personal handicrafts, personal works of art. And therefore, if I give you one of these, Johannes, thanks for the interview.
Thank you very much.
That's worth something to you because
Okay.
it's so beautiful.
There's 1 minute left on my camera, so maybe a short statement by Stefan Lutschinger.
I wonder if it someday will possible to digitize these real flowers.
Okay,
these
so
artworks.
maybe that's phase number 3 of turning those beautiful tokens into a digital currency that we can use all over the world. So maybe that's phase 3, and maybe we'll see you again back here in Amstetten, Lower Austria.
When it comes to academics, learning environment. But something also that I really would love to point out is the beautiful ability that it has to teach a child to be a human being. Just because of the way that my daughter, she's been a Montessori student since she was 4. She taught me how to be a better person because of what she was learning in her environment in Montessori. So in turn, it made me be a better mother to 5 children and a better educator. And I'm going to give her some time to talk.
Okay, hi, my name is Abigail, and I've been a student at Montessori for 5 years, and I have had a really good experience there, and I've learned that when you get to learn people, that you can create good experiences with them, and that friendship can last for a very long time because of how you have been connected with people from that experience in school. Thank you.
We really hope that you really consider taking the time to look over the Wildflower School. Thank you.
Leader and Republican candidate in Utah for the United States Senate. She held various posts in state government, including Deputy Chief of Staff and spokesperson for Governor Gary Herbert, worked at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in public affairs, communication, and branding, then moved to the private sector as Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer and eventually Acting Executive Officer for Evoque Nano.
We started to realize how much we really need each other. And neuroscience tells us our brains are wired to connect with others. In conversation, pathways light up our brain. They light up our brain, mirroring the other person's emotions and behavior. I believe we made connections before this world began. And our connections are the one thing we take with us when we depart mortality. It's one of our greatest human needs, and it's essential for our growth.
I honestly did not mean to sign up to speak, Kelly Carpenter, because I have spoken before, but I just wanted to further endorse Wildflower. Agreed. Thank you.
And what I understood from that, what I understood from observing a number of Montessori classrooms, is that basically kind of it honored this truth. It allowed the children to follow their own path, but to follow their own path in the context of a supportive mixed-age community. And so once again, like there was that individuality and interconnectedness that was woven in.
And project manager, Dr. Ryota Kanai from ATL, just focus on the imagination operated cybernetic avatar. It's a very challenging technologies to overcome limitation of the brain.
Decentralized networks have existed long before humans were around. In fact, fungi have been successfully implementing such systems for 1.3 billion years, making them the most successful kingdom on our planet.
We're removing from a very old sort of paradigm of microbial behavior as sort of standalone asocial organisms to microbes as social actors, right? Performing very complex behaviors.
The third principle is that it's a lab school dedicated to the understanding of children and advancement of the Montessori method. And so we explore things like putting video cameras in the ceiling and using image recognition algorithms to understand what each child is working on at each time.
How information across these fungal networks, how it's processed and how it's shared, and how that leads to different strategies across different types of fungal networks. So first, it has to create an infrastructure, right? It has to create an infrastructure to actually go out in the soil and collect resources.
Shoes and a trade. What does this have to do with data? It can mean a lot if you are wildflower schools. They wanted to track activities within the classroom. This way, the school can better understand what activities are working and what the children like to do.
So complex adaptive systems, the greatest insight for me was that we can model things by having these agents. Agents are kind of little bits of program that are programmed with what is called a condition action rule. In this condition, the agent does that. In this condition, it does something else. And now you just throw a whole bunch of agents together. Each agent perceives some condition, performs an action. That action changes the conditions, not only for itself, but for all the other agents. So you now get all these kind of direct and indirect interactions between the agents. And that leads you to all kind of very interesting results. I already gave the examples of ecosystems. In economics, of course, where the agents then are people who buy and sell things. Depending on what one agent sells, another one may buy, prices may increase, and you may have all these kind of nonlinear effects on the stock exchange. That, in say, is a very interesting paradigm that illuminates a lot. But of course, it depends on what do you choose as your elements? What are your agents? And what do you program your agents to do? And what people typically do is they have some kind of a simplistic view of what the system is. They program the agents. They see that maybe the simulation doesn't do what they want, so they play a little bit with the rules until they get something that looks nice, and then they say, well, look, we have proven that this and this will happen. But actually, they have just proven that this simulation of these agents with these rules does that thing.
Next, it has to evaluate where you would actually transport those resources for trade. And next, it has to collect payment for those resources to get a good price. We've been very focused on looking at fungal networks in a laboratory setting.
This includes doing hardware, firmware, enclosures, and mobile and web applications to help bring the data to life.
I had the honor and pleasure of learning about his vision from his daughter, Christina Engelbart, who runs the Engelbart Institute and who was kind enough to join me at a workshop in 2014, where we tried to bring together people across disciplines to talk about human computation. What she explained to me is that the mouse, which is what Douglas Engelbart was demonstrating, was not just supposed to be a clever new interface to a computer, but it was based on his vision about augmenting human capabilities. The idea is, how do we get humans and machines working together more fluidly so that we can actually enhance collaboration among humans to solve problems more effectively? So Douglas Engelbart invented the mouse not just so we could have a convenient interface, but so that we could actually work together more effectively. And so I love this quote. Engelbart promulgated a philosophy of bootstrapping, in which each experimental transformation of the socio-technical system, obviously he didn't have the word inversion at the time, introversion, so in which each introversion of the socio-technical system that was the NLS was his abbreviation for online system, again this was 1968, would feed back into the system itself, causing it to evolve and presumably to improve. So this is a really powerful concept We have technology that helps us work together and solve problems more effectively. What if we use that capability to help us improve that capability so we can be increasingly more effective at working together and solving problems? And this is the bootstrapping idea.
As this line of thinking accelerates and the notion of a goal-driven ledger becomes more palatable, suggestions may be converted not by the user, but by the ledger itself. In this case, the ledger is missing a key data source, which it requires in order to better understand this user.
The shoes have a sensor right here. The tray also has a sensor right here. We use Bluetooth and an in-classroom network to make it work seamlessly.
The ledger begins searching for a device which delivers the required data when used. From this list, the ledger begins sorting the options most likely to appeal to the user in question.
Today what we're going to dive into is really recommendations, personalization, and how we're seeing that in the market.
Yeah, sure. So there's a number of customers, very large customers of AWS that are doing personalization.
Personalization and recommendation engines are something we've heard customers talk about for a long time.
And then there's cold starts, for example. So cold starts are when you don't know anything about your customer at all. So that's when you've just sort of onboarded a new customer.
So
how
first time at the website, might have signed in, don't know anything about me.
Exactly, exactly.
In situations where no suitable product is found, the ledger may investigate a bespoke solution. By analyzing historical data, it is increasingly possible to discern qualitative information such as taste and aesthetic sensibility, which may be used in the creation of a design proposal. With the advent of technologies such as CNC milling and the emergent possibilities of 3D printing, a custom object may be created to trigger this user's interest. In this way, the ledger is able to plug gaps in its knowledge and refine its model of human behavior.
There's a lot of tooling involved. There's an open source library that we have called SpringRoll. It's got tools for building games, inspecting telemetry in real time, and doing all sorts of other things related to accessibility like captioning and so forth. We tool everything we can think of because we've just got this never-ending pipeline of game production. This is Legos for analytics, basically. This is a custom product that we built for ourselves called Boson, and any individual unit of computation can be managed separately, and the directed graphs of processing and dependency chains can all be managed and traced and viewed and edited. And
user data has the capability to survive beyond the limits of our biological selves, in much the same way as genetic code is released and propagated in nature. By considering this data through a Lamarckian lens, the codified experiences within the ledger become an accumulation of behavioral knowledge throughout the life of an individual.
The opportunities are pretty extraordinary, as I say, was suggested by the 2018 blockchain working group that Majority Leader Calderon and I were part of. This is aimed at one of the recommendations coming from the blockchain working group, and it deals with verified credentials. Verifiable credentials are part of our daily life. Think, for example, of a driver's license we use to assert that we can drive a car, passports that enable us to travel between countries, high school transcripts that are used to prove our educational level coming out of high school. Verifying these credentials, members, is often a time-consuming paper-based process. Without adequate security, electronic credentials are seen as too easily forged and unreliable. Blockchain-based credentials can help remove friction that enables securing showing of online credentials verified for proof under the individual's control. One, it creates the California Trust Framework to ensure the use of verifiable credentials to a standard recognized by both the public and private sector. It takes us down the road, the next step. It is time that California engages in this, and then it also allows for the ability, and particularly I like this because it's about high school students, where they can use the blockchain to verify their high school records as they want to move on to use them for other purposes, college or the like. Again, trying to educate the next generation in that regard. And so today, to speak in support of this measure is Judith Fleenor with Trust Over IP Foundation and Tony Rose with Input Output.
By thinking of user data as multi-generational, it becomes possible for emerging users to benefit from the preceding generation's behaviors and decisions.
So if you take the collection of these things, if you take the kind of collective reasoning we've been talking about, and then the different modalities of distributed sensing and these ideas of coordinated action, then you can sort of start to imagine how we have the building blocks here to build a collective organism, one that can think, one that can sense, and one that can act.
As new users enter an ecosystem, they begin to create their own trail of data.
I'm just passionate about doing Montessori outside.
So tell us what Dr. Montessori said about being outside.
The traditions that I'm speaking about, Mr. Gurdjieff's tradition of the fourth way, was preceded by many thousands of years by the Taoist tradition, which from my studies also is connected with this fourth way. The Taoist tradition doesn't believe in what would be complete emptiness, but rather they begin not with complete emptiness, but with a void that is not empty. That is, it's full of potential. And this is like zero. You can represent it by a zero, and you can represent the beginning of the unified force of consciousness as one. When you reflect upon this unified force, this initial force, like we are now reflecting on it, then one duplicates itself. So it's 0, 1, 1. And these add together to form 2, which is represented by the symbol of yin and yang. So that the proto-science of the Taoist begins with this idea of 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, which many recognize as the beginning of the Fibonacci series, the life spiral.
Whenever I started going back and reading her work and looking at the photographs from her early schools, was that she actually was outside with the kids as much or more than they were inside. And she describes that in her writing. So she talks about the children's house and how they need to have an outdoor space that has shelter from the rain and shelter from the sun, so that they can eat out there and that they can work out there and that they can sleep out there. So she imagined almost every part of their day being able to take place outside. Some of Dr. Montessori's time in India. And for a while they were over there, they lived in a town called Kodaikanal, India. And there was a young woman named Lena who was apprenticing under her. She went through the training and then was apprenticing under Dr. Montessori in this town and started this teeny tiny little Montessori school on the bank of a lake in this town. And it started with just 4 kids that were 2 to 4 years old. And then over the next year or 2, blossomed into 60 children. And Mario was helping Lena with this school. So you can imagine their schoolhouse was this teeny tiny cottage that Lena was also living in. And there were 60 kids. So we can just intuit that was an outdoor school. Those kids were not inside that tiny cottage, those 60 children. And these interviews just go into beautiful detail about how they would go out into nature and they would go on hikes and they would go observe plants and they would observe animals. And then this information, this curiosity that was struck and these observations that they made, they would bring back and use to create the nomenclature material that we are all using today.
By comparing this emergent ledger with the mass of historical user data, it becomes possible to make increasingly accurate predictions about decisions and future behaviors.
And so we need AI to democratize the creation of virtual worlds. AI is going to help us ingest the real world and turn it into virtual worlds, so we can have digital twins of the real things. And then we're going to be able to use those things we collect from the real world to remix them and recompose new ones. Every child has a virtual world or numbers of them trapped in their minds. You know, when you talk to a 6-year-old, they'll tell you all about these virtual worlds, and they communicate them to you with words, incepting your mind with their vision We want every child to be able to actually turn that into a real virtual world in the metaverse. The key to that is it has to be AI. There's no other way we're going to be able to do that.
The proposed in this talk is called evolutionary development, or EvoDevo. It is a model that a few thousand biologists and other scientists find more useful than simple evolution or Darwinism to describe both biological and non-biological change. Evolutionary processes look like growing trees with more branching on the tree over time, and each branch is unpredictable in its direction of growth. Think of Darwin's tree of life. Developmental processes, by contrast, look like funnels, the opposite of a tree. They take the chaos and diversity out of a system, and they guide it to a highly probable and predictable future. Development is also a cyclical process. Think of the life cycle between a seed, the organism, and the new seed.
If you think about some of the ideas that have been raised earlier in the event, the bottom line raw data is super granular, and there's a key challenge involved in getting up into more and more semantic levels of meaning. And I think I heard Ms. Levy talk about how maybe one level of meaning is what's meaningful in the context of the game itself, and maybe the next level might get you closer to some of the constructs in your learning frameworks, and there might be next level above that. There might be patterns across those kinds of things, and with a structure like this, you can model any arbitrary analytic like that. So yeah, Legos for analytics, and if you get confused about how it's all working, you can trace and see, okay.
We don't really understand the context of trade, right? Trade strategies are predicted to shift, even if there's just a small change in, let's say, available resources in the soil, or how fast a plant may be growing, how much photosynthesis is happening above ground. We don't understand the chemical, the physical, the environmental stimuli that's actually mediating these trade strategies.
By creating new data, Wildflower schools can now have more insight into how to teach more effectively. At Lab 651, we make new things possible. All you need is an idea, and maybe a pair of shoes and a tray.
We're using a type of Bluetooth technology that allows us to understand how kids and adults move in outdoor spaces. We actually put sensors in the playgrounds, and we'll be able to visualize what parts of the playground that the kids are playing more on, and how active they're going to be by being able to look at their movements in time and space.
One of the things that we've really focused on is thinking a lot about relationship. So when we study space, we're not looking just at how children are using the spaces, we're also looking at how adults, seniors, and caregivers are using those spaces. If you have more social networks, and you build those social networks specifically in public spaces, you are more resilient to issues that happen in your community.
We actually kind of tested this idea of organismic computing. This was about 10 years ago. There was no augmented reality, so we simulated it in a first-person shooter kind of gaming environment. We created a game, but there was no shooting involved. It was a hide-and-seek game. So the hiders were NPCs, non-player characters controlled by the computer. But then we had real people who were trying to find them. And so we had three groups. We had a control group, which we called the radio group. And so basically, they would look around, and then they just had the headset. They could talk to each other. So each person was on a terminal at home somewhere, and they would talk to each other, and they would try to coordinate their behaviors. They would say, yeah, I saw someone, they were acting kind of suspiciously, so we had to engineer suspicious behavior in the NPCs. I saw someone acting suspiciously, and I saw them around here. And so that was kind of like, this is how we do things today. So then we had a social group. So with augmented reality, we have this opportunity to surface information into the visual. In this case, they could actually text with each other, which provided sort of a record of things. People could refer back to it. And then they could actually start to map out where suspected individuals were based on their last known location. It wasn't really real time, but it was better than the radio group in that sense. And then finally, we had the organismic group, where it was more immersive, where the augmented reality was actually based on the system tracking these different individuals. So if you saw someone who looked suspicious, you could just sort of like tap on that person and say, I rate them as suspicious or not suspicious, and then everyone else on your team would instantly have that information. And when they saw that person walk by, they would see all the sort of aggregate ratings.
So once you have that public space, once you start to weave public space into your cities, what do those public spaces look like? Do people actually want to go there? The design of those spaces is as important as just having the space.
What we found is that with the smallest groups of people, the radio actually worked fine. It was the best interface. With medium-sized groups, the social interface worked best. But with the largest groups, you had the greatest benefits from the synergy that resulted from having so many eyes and sharing that information broadly.
And so this is my first meme I've ever done in my life. But I like it because it's really a bit about a poker game, right? So this is what we're trying to understand is this trade for carbon to phosphorus. And you've got the plant root on one side and the fungal network on the other. And they've been doing this for 450 million, I get shivers thinking, 450 million years. How could we not be studying the strategies that have evolved, right? And I would argue that a lot of what's been happening is in the dark, right? In these systems, it's totally underground. So it's very, very hard to understand and track these trade strategies. And so we grow it in the lab, in this system, where the fungal network is in this very pristine environment, but it also allows us to have an extraordinary amount of ability to manipulate the situation.
And what's interesting about the software that we created for these schools is that it's a self-limiting technology. It comes in and kickstarts a social process, but the software plays a foundational but ultimately limited role in the ecosystem that it fosters.
We started off with Morgan Maguire, the chief scientist from Roblox, and he talks about scalability, but it was interesting because he really talked about scalability at a very, very high level. So not only did he call out the challenges of getting 10,000 people to interact together, but he also really encouraged us to think about the implication of having so many people together in terms of behavior, ethics, and civility. And really called out that those things need to be built, those rules need to be built in a system from the ground up. I mean, you just don't build a system and hope that the behaviors are going to be, people are going to behave. So, we need to lay down the rules and build the rules. It's a little bit similar to what we heard from Tiffany Wang, which is sort of about ethics and policy on the podcast. Like, it's really important to take those, safety, civility, ethics, to build those and think about them very early in the design of the experience that we build. So
I don't like the word "it's been a nuisance." On the other hand, etymologically, as I'm trying to show you, it's more or less perfect, because control in a regulatory sense about how you are steering isn't about bullying anybody, isn't about knowing the machinery of doing it even. It is a question of having something that you want to achieve and finding ways that work of achieving it. Manipulating a system, if you will, so that it produces the desired result. It uses the fact that it's going out of control to bring it back into control, and you can be having another beer in the bistro.
And we can tag those quantum dots onto resources, like apatite, which is a rock form of phosphate. And what this allows us to do is actually then study how resources are moved across the network, because you can use different colors. So right now we've got about 3 colors that we can work with. And this allows us to sort of change, for example, we can add the different colors at different times, or we can add the colors at different places in space. And then we can for the first time, sitting at that poker table, kind of understand the strategies that these fungal networks exhibit.
We actually put sensors in the playground and we'll be able to visualize what parts of the playground that the kids are playing more on and how active they're going to be by being able to look at their movements in time and space.
So we found that fungi are very good at discriminating among plant roots, right? They can tell a plant that's giving them lots of carbon versus one that's giving them very few carbon. We also know that when you reward fungi with carbon, this triggers more cooperation. So in this case, it provides more nitrogen. The fungus ends up giving more nitrogen to the host root. One of the sort of the most interesting ideas is this hypothesis that fungi can actually restrict the autonomy of root systems. So what that means is that the fungi can get into a root system and actually down-regulate the ability of the plant's own nutrient transporters to take up resources from the environment. So basically hijacking the plant's own nutrient uptake system. But that works perfectly for the fungi because then they're getting plenty of carbon and the plant becomes even more dependent on the fungi.
We'll have to consider UBI in some form. AI will cause great abundance, great GDP growth, great productivity growth, all the things economists measure, and increasing income disparity.
This is the Watt steam governor that I've drawn a caricature of. So you've got a shaft which is whizzing round like that. And if it goes too fast, centrifugal force drives these two weights out, which pulls this sleeve up, which cuts off the fuel supply. That's how that works, invented by James Watt. I think one of the earliest cybernetic inventions, because what this is doing, you'll notice, is keeping a runaway variable under control, like the convicts, but it brings it back into the control in the very process of it going out of control.
And then feeding that data into data visualizations that show what each child is working on during the day, during the month, and during the year. And so we can create software that's like an acupuncture for society.
Now, here's another tool that we're developing in our lab that allows us to actually make these X-ray 3D scans of the interactions between fungal networks and roots.
So these examples of hybrid intelligence building blocks and AI and augmented reality augmentations kind of just scratch the surface, I think, of what's possible and how transformative it can be. I'm hoping it will just inspire our thinking and ideation together. And I guess as we consider how to combine natural and synthetic information processing, distributed sensing, collective action, or coordinated action, does this begin to crystallize a vision of a planetary supercomputer, or maybe a superorganism that can bootstrap its own evolution?
The quadrant chart down here in the lower left is someone with an addiction lying in the road. Along comes a benevolent billionaire, gives him $1,000. And the reality is probably it goes to more drugs and changes nothing. So you have this short-term thing that's not a solution. The guy is benevolent but doesn't help. Then he goes off and wants to be a longevity billionaire, invests in how can he live forever. So he's thinking long-term, but all about himself. Then with luck, he thinks about his grandkids and the world they're going to live in. And of course, he's going to be there too. Maybe he should invest on behalf of everybody. Maybe he should try and even out some of the disparities in income and healthcare access and so forth. And so here is long-term equitable well-being, and that's what we're driving towards.
Now, I believe that we have here a very vital management principle that you would like if you were the manager of something, that if something's going wrong, the fact that it is going wrong would bring it back into control and you could spend your days on the golf course. Instead of sitting around hoping against hope that you will spot the thing going wrong and beat it over the head before it's gone too far and you're all in jail. I was thinking these kinds of thought when Wiener's first book appeared. The book set me absolutely on fire. I read it in 1960, I know that. And I wrote to Wiener and said, I think I'm a cybernetician. You see, so that's how the lucky young man got in with a gang of people old enough to be his father, you see. And I met Wiener and I met all the others, and Warren became my mentor, as I've already said. So that brings me into the picture.
Now, we've actually done an innovation project we call Impact, where we essentially train young people who've never used a computer before, do like data cleaning, picture labeling, and stuff like that. So people who've previously been like receiving food assistance from WFP, like young people that now learn how to do like micro work online, like digital work. And part of why is the project not scaling as fast as it could? Because we don't have the financial inclusion. Most of those people don't have an identity. They don't fulfill the KYC requirements of traditional banks or anything. But so we've actually now done a pilot in Kenya. So we have 13,000 graduates of the program by now. And we've just done a pilot in Kenya where we use Celo dollar stable coins to pay the poor people, like they're living in a slum outside of Nairobi, and they receive the money in Celo dollars. And not only do they now have, a wallet that's theirs, they can also use their income to prove that they have an income, they have a job, and they can borrow against it to get credit if they want to invest into something.
Exactly, and this is absolutely the model which we use with the Rohingya Learn and Earn, as well as we are in discussions with the San Francisco government to San Francisco city mayor actually, which they want to rehabilitate people with criminal record. Yes, they are not going to be accepted into the old system that easily. So they use a similar program for that. It has many applications and it's so needed, existential again.
The flagship of which is a deal that we have closed with the Ministry of Education containing 5 million students using a technology called PRISM integrated in the Cardano blockchain. Every one of these students will have a digital ID called a DID, and that DID carries with it metadata that will travel with them throughout their entire academic life, and like those who left Facebook's clutches of the university into the real world, will actually follow them into the economic world. So as they graduate, as they go into the economy, eventually this infrastructure can be used for property, for payments, for voting, and all other manners of their economic life. And what's beautiful about this evergreen deal is it's extensible. Our priorities and goals are directly aligned with the vision and priorities and goals of the Ethiopian government. In a recently published doctrine of Ethiopia 2025, there was a bold vision to digitize the country on 4 pillars, the first of which was a national ID system. It is our belief that the work we have done here with PRISM and Cardano for these 5 million students will inevitably grow to be an inspiration and perhaps the system for 107 million Ethiopians, allowing them for the first time to globalize on equal terms with the United States, the European Union, China, and other modern developed economies. In addition to this system goes far beyond just identity. Our belief is that it can be used to help people procure jobs, to help people prove their skills, because the system can verify credentials, the system can verify certificates, the system can be used for a litany of activities which are required for people to understand who are credible actors to deal with and who have earned the right to have a job.
The idea behind this platform is to really scrutinize and try to help us discover the models, discover the things that are predictive, and discover the patterns that are important. We don't think we have the answer, so how can we go about systematically discovering the answer?
I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm just not going to do it anymore. I'm not part of that system. So today, April 4th, 2024, I'm going to vote for somebody who I believe actually could make a difference, regardless if he wins. So I'm endorsing and supporting RFK. He's the horse to ride in November. I wish him well. I wish his campaign well. And I hope a lot of people get inspired. Win or lose, I hope people take from this election a strong civic sense that we do need to change things. We do need to move forward. And it's time we heal ourselves in every dimension and respect. I hope that everybody listening understands that. And I hope that people know that we can always make things better. No matter how bad it seems, how bad it gets, we as people can make a heaven or a hell, and the difference is the intent and will and the time. We can fix everything. It just requires the will, and it just requires the commitment over a protracted period of time to get there.
the intended purpose of hybrid intelligence systems? Who gets to decide what that purpose is? And based on whose values? And then, of course, the other natural question that arises is, if we all agree on some application of hybrid intelligence, how do we know that it's going to actually do what we want it to do? And if it does, what are some potential unintended consequences or secondary effects